Good evening. Welcome to the July 10th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, I imagine we have some announcements this evening. I know I do. Does anybody have any announcements? Please go right ahead, Trustee Herrera.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So this is just a save the date as everyone's still planning the rest of their summer. So the 2019 Ossining Fire Department Parade, which is a highly anticipated event that we have every year, is Friday, August 2nd at 7 p.m. Lineup starts Upper Croton Avenue, Roosevelt Square area, and it goes all the way downtown. So pick the spot that's best for you. I'm sure the fire department and police department soon will have more information on that, but that's Friday, August 2nd at 7 p.m. And this Sunday is the countywide.
August 2nd, you said?
Yeah. It's always on a Friday. You know, it's okay. And this Sunday is the countywide Hispanic Heritage Celebration. It's going to be from 12 to 7 p.m. at Kensico Dam Plaza in Valhalla, and that's part of the county's heritage celebrations going on until September. This is just a small little plug for communities that care. Once again, CTC, which is Ossining Communities That Care, along with great chaperones from the Ossining Police Department and some school district personnel, are taking 40 youth as part of the Youth to Youth Leadership Training Program. It's a 4-day program in Rhode Island where they learn leadership skills, they hear speakers, but these particular 40 teens have made a pledge to be drug-free. So they need some assistance in attending the conference. So if you have it in your heart or you're able to, there's a GoFundMe page. It's called Y2Y or Youth to Youth Ossining, or contact Alice Joslow. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Rika? Nope. Okay. Well, I imagine it's just wrapping up right now. Karen and I were among the many folks who were down on James Street this evening. It was the first of 4 planned block parties that are going to be taking place this summer, organized by the Ossining School District with the Ossining Police Department. It was very well attended. It was very hot. I did actually go home and change after enjoying myself out there in the hot last hours of the sunshine. So thank you very much to everybody who made that possible. I think it was a really nice opportunity for Ossining families to get together and play games, get books, dance, eat. It was a lovely event, and there are 3 more throughout the summer, and I know that Bill Garrison is with us this evening. The rec department has been supporting this effort, so if there's anything that I'm leaving out, please let us know, and there'll be notice of the upcoming ones as they approach. I did want to call folks' attention to we have organizations, so many organizations that we work with in the county, in the region, and one of them is NICOM, the New York Conference of Mayors. Many of us have attended their trainings in the past, and with all that's happened in this season of the legislature up in Albany, some of the more mundane elements, the efforts that they reviewed as part of their budget and things that were included might have gotten lost in the more high-profile events, and that is there was a full restoration of the extreme winter recovery funds, which is an important part of our budget each year. We have a lot of state roadways that we maintain during extreme weather events, and there was talk of cutting back on those, and NICOM is among the other things that they do for educating folks like us and providing us with resources is they advocate for us with the legislature up in Albany. And so this week we got a letter that was sent to our representatives just thanking them for being supportive of this, and they sent it to all of the municipalities that, in our case, Sandy Galiff and Carlucci represent. So it's just important to know we have advocates out there who are looking at the more mundane things. It's not just about driver's licenses and marijuana. So I want to invite everyone to the Ossining Documentary and Discussion Series screening. The July event takes place next Thursday, July 18th. As always, it is free to the public. It's at the Ossining Public Library. It begins at 6:30. You can learn more at ossiningdocumentaries.org. And while you're looking at your calendar, I will just point out to folks that if you're not home watching this live, I hope that you are down at Market Square enjoying the first of a series of Wednesday evenings. It's acoustic music happening at Market Square. Thank you to again Bill Garrison and your department that's organized this. There are Trustee Herrera mentioned the Firefighters Parade happening August 2nd, which is the one Friday in the summer that is not a Friday summer concert series at the waterfront. So I trust that you will be down at the waterfront on Friday evenings enjoying that series. It's organized by the town. Wednesday evenings, beginning this week, you can be at Market Square enjoying acoustic music. And alternating Mondays, you can be at Henry Gordine Park down at the waterfront. Every other Monday, we've already had our first one, which is July 1st, and the next one is happening on July 15th, which there will be a special guest there that you might like to shake hands with and meet. Is it okay if I make the announcement here? I imagine you may reference it.
Yes. Well,
So it's an opportunity to meet the manager. Karen will be down there shaking hands and listening to your ideas and enjoying some jazz music with what we hope is a beautiful night on the waterfront. So before I pass it on to Karen, did you have any announcements, Trustee Bazemore? Thanks for joining us. Karen?
thank you, Mayor. Before we get started, I do have two brief announcements. One next week, MTA is getting started at the work on the Ossining train station, which is replacing the roof. They paid a lot of attention to restore it to its historic accuracy. It's a pretty big job, but it will. They will be setting up, and it will affect the ability to pick up and drop off on the upper level there. So they will be constructing a sidewalk shed and making sure people are safe, and they're really trying to do it with minimal disruption to parking and everything else. But during that time, probably be a little inconvenient, but ultimately it will really be a great addition to the train station, and we're happy that they're taking such care to restore it to its historic beauty. I also want to announce that Marlene Cheatham has been appointed, or I'm appointing her to the zoning board to fulfill Greg Meyer's term. So we're happy to have Marlene on the zoning board.
Before we go into the agenda, I realized that I didn't announce some very important appointments as well.
Yes, that's
So,
right.
But just before we get into the
Yes,
agenda,
we have more appointments. So that's all I have to announce right now.
then I will actually what I should have led with, because this is a pretty big deal. We've been talking about the comprehensive plan for years, updating it, and we just now have taken a big step in moving forward with tangibly making doing an update to the comprehensive plan. The steering committee is going to be a 9-member group that will be comprised of myself, Trustee Bazemore, and the member of the planning board who will be joining us is Jeff Gasparo, and 6 members at large in the community, and they are Rodolfo Moran, Becky Fahey, Omar Lopez, Melissa Banta, Sheila Vereen Massengale, and Paulo Torres. We are really excited. Everybody who I spoke with who has agreed to participate and commit to this is really enthusiastic about this opportunity to make sure that the plan for the village going forward is reflective of the desires of our whole community, and they're ready to hit the ground running. We're going to be sending out an email with some links of background and information on our current comprehensive plan and other studies that have been done, and then we'll have our first official in-person meeting later this month as soon as we establish a date that works, hopefully for everyone on the committee. So thank you to everyone who applied for that. The good news is that there's an awful lot of work to do, and we have a lot of people who raised their hand to be part of this. No doubt there's going to be subcommittees established, as well as a significant amount of outreach that we're going to need help with, and feedback throughout this process that we think will take at least 1 year to do the recommendations, and then it'll take another year to really implement it into our zoning code. So we are really grateful to have so many people willing to participate in this in one way or another. So we will formally have that in a minute, maybe next week, so that it will be forever documented and something that gets approved. I just want it to be in the record somehow, and we don't necessarily provide minutes for the work session, but we wanted to get this going.
It shall be done.
Right, and I do want to recognize, because not everybody, I think most people know Marlene, but not everybody does, certainly. So Marlene brings a tremendous amount of experience as a village trustee, former village trustee. She has been a longtime member of the Rec Advisory Board. She is currently the chair of IFCA as well as the chair of Clearview School. She really brings a wealth of municipal experience, and I think she will be a very good addition to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and we're very happy to have her. Getting on to our agenda, our first item up is we wanted to discuss fee schedule for use at rooms in the community center and at Market Square. And the reason this came up is we've had people are using the rooms. However, an unintended consequence of having all of our rooms except for the multipurpose room really are free of charge. And we like to do that to encourage community groups and people to use the center. However, an unintended consequence is that there are certain groups and some groups and agencies that are either using the space or asking to use the space on a weekly basis for things that typically are more operational. So in a way, it's creating a situation where we can have people maybe using free space in lieu of space that really requires, should be rented or owned. So we want to make sure that we keep to the original intent. And one of the things we want to do, we don't want to discourage people from using the space, but one of the things we want to do is establish a fee based on what it really requires the staff in terms of setup and takedown and the cost of the village. So I'm going to ask Bill to come up and go over. Bill and Stuart and I met, Bill Garrison, director of the Rec Center, and Stuart Kahan, Corporation Counsel, met to discuss what we can do to just set a level playing field, not discourage people, but not encourage people from maybe not, finding the space they need to run their organizations.
So we took a look at the cost to set up the room as far as like tables and chairs, and we came up with what the basic hourly rate of that person who would be doing that. And just taking that for a 2-hour room rental, taking what that would cost, and came up with a rate for the rooms at the community center for $25 for 2 hours for 0 to 40 people, and then $50 for 2 hours for 41 or more people. We've had 173 room rentals from January 1st to date, so just give you kind of a reference of how many are being processed through there. 42 of those in the art room, 21 in the multi-purpose room, 60 in the museum area, and 50 in the music room. Just a kind of a breakdown. So it's kind of an equal spread for the most part throughout each of the rooms getting utilized. We took a little bit of a look at a reference of around what room rentals. The Ossining Public Library, it's $20 an hour. There is no charge to Ossining schools or not-for-profit organizations through the library. The Theodore Young Community Center in White Plains is $150 to $200, and they do that on a 4-hour block. The Carver Center, which is a community center located in Portchester, their rate goes anywhere from $55 to $75 an hour per, depending upon the room. So some other communities have anything from $110 for an hour to $225 for 3 hours. So it's kind of all over the map, but quite high in most places. So that's just a bit of a reference.
I just want to, you mentioned the library, and I'm not sure what some of the other communities are. We're obviously not the same level of affluence as a lot of Westchester communities. So,
The Carver Center's in Portchester. So
okay,
it would
that's
be
helpful to know.
Analogous to.
Yes, that's much more similar than a lot of other Westchester communities. And the Carver Center rate was 55, did you say?
Yeah, they're 55 to 75 depending on the room. These is for facility rental rates.
But for what type of applicant?
Yeah, so that was actually the question I was going to ask, because we've had discussions about not-for-profits versus for-profits, and our understanding was that that's not a distinction that we can make based on not-for-profits or
We're not
for-profits.
permitted to.
But we could make a distinction of public, just a minute, if well, whatever, they get different legal counsel and nobody challenges it. We could make a distinction for, obviously, I don't know, of those 173 rentals that you referenced this year, How many of those are for the Recreation Advisory Board or the Ossining Arts Project? Are those included in the list of room rentals? Because those, I assume, would obviously be exempt.
Yeah, those are not included in that.
Okay. All right.
So I would just need more, you know what, rewind. I think it's great that we're finally, once again, but this time actually more in concrete of a plan, having a discussion about just how we use our space and make sure that's allocated and that we're addressing the staff and resources that it takes, no matter who you are, to use the space. My only concern is that historically, and I'm not saying that it has to be this way, but in my understanding, I've embraced the notion that if you're an Ossining group, whether you're a registered 501c3 or 4, or you're just a group that is an entity that is not really registered with anyone, but you're a group, that Ossining's really been able to enable them to operate if it's for the good of the community. We've had a lot of groups in the past. We had Youth of Ossining Project. We have Ossining Fathers Hispano groups that are not really actual entities. They're just organized groups of people who organize and meet and do events and for the betterment or for the common interests of people in our community. So I don't really know which types of groups prompted this discussion. So that I would just like to know, because I kind of want to see what is the need for it now, and if we are going to, even though we're not allowed to do it per se, exempt nonprofits, aren't the majority of the people that are using the rooms right now technically nonprofits or entities that are just organized groups of citizens that just use it? So, for example, you have political groups, you have, I'm assuming, some church groups, you got some, let's say I start asking the NAACP to have their chapter meetings there, right? Like who are we talking about here?
We're talking about basically anybody, with the exception of the exempt groups, who would apply. So this would be universal across the board. It would be very objective, And the reason that we're doing it is not necessarily. There is a cost to the village to, set up and take down. So $25 basically covers it. Actually, I don't think the charges that we would have for Market Square would be a bit higher, because that involves taking chairs and tents and setting up. So the idea of doing this is there has been instances where the intended use of the room is it's really being used for other purposes, in the sense that it's one thing to, use the space for different meetings or once a month. It's another thing to run weekly operations that typically wouldn't be necessary. They may be open to the community, but they may not necessarily be run in a way that's, they're really using this because it's free space to run an organization in a more operational way. So that's something I think that we have to look at. It's not necessarily that this will stop that, and we can continue to do that, but at least it makes sure that to a certain extent you're not using space for a very, very, on a weekly basis for a use that we really did not intend as as a community. And that you're not taking away that space from other groups too, if you're using it so often. So at least having that fee, it may or may not deter something. It's a pretty nominal fee, so I don't see it being an obstacle. A $25 fee for 2 hours is a nominal fee for any organization, including most nonprofits. There's no real issue there. It's certainly much lower than a lot of the other fees that we charge, but it's a way to just sort of set the intent of the spirit. And Bill, I'm sure you might have something to add to that.
Well, there's one organization that is used every Friday night since January 1st. So again, it kind of caught up on this, like, is this what we want to have happening? So it could very well end up where this organization is using it every Friday night, this room, and then another organization is going to come in and use this room for every Friday night. So if that's what we want to happen, then having the no fees is working, and that's the intent. Do we want to have do we have a fee set up that we are people are paying for what is being offered. There is a degree of setting up and taking down and cleaning up that room for those groups. So that's where this kind of came out of. And I didn't get to the village or the market square. I don't know if I want to go in, if you want me to go into that too, but that's a little bit different because that's primarily, it's going to have different stages because Market Square is primarily going to be after hours of the park staff who would help staff that. So there's overtime rates that incur on after, in the evening or on Saturdays. And if something's to occur on Sunday with the union contract, the double time would be applied. So those rates would go anywhere from a $40 rental for 2 hours for during the day, Monday through Friday. After 3 p.m. and on Saturdays, $185, and for Sundays and holidays, $250. Again, that's based on the hourly rate and fringe and the overtime rates to come up with that rate.
So here's my thought. We're charging a fee because there's a group of people who are using it every Friday night. And the people who are using it every Friday night, because it's a nominal fee, will continue to rent the room every single Friday night. Right? They will. If they, I would assume they would, because we're talking about $25. So we've acknowledged an issue where there's a certain kind of group, because this is not, Miss Jenkins and the knitting group meeting, right? This is you should be here. World Ventures, just using an example, World Ventures meeting to work on their little, recruit people for their multi-level marketing scheme. The fee is not stopping that. So one could argue, why are we charging community members and taxpayers for a salary that's already being paid, right? Because these people are going to be working regardless. And so now, because we have this group that comes to use it every Friday night, now people are being charged. And we're going to charge them something that's not going to really stop them from actually using the room, right? So I'm kind of like, because couldn't you just say no?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an internal policy thing from the rec. I mean, or you would be coming to the rec advisory or the board of trustees, right?
The challenge is it's not really an internal issue. It's just there's a gray area here. And while we haven't had the occurrence that I'm aware of where a business is doing business there and using this as office space, that has not happened.
Haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had people that were like selling
Absolutely.
their financial services.
What we
and
do.
stuff,
Yeah,
right?
not since I've been on board, but I know I did hear that in the
So
past.
maybe
Well,
that happened.
and excuse me, for-profits are using that for recruitment under the guise of creating employment. But that is nothing more than using the public space for a private thing called I'm recruiting for my company. Whether they're creating employment or not is not the issue. The issue is they're a private company. They could have done that at their place of business just as easily. So that is a use of a private entity using public space for business.
I don't know when that occurred last. That was not
Not that long ago.
okay. So is that something that's also going on a weekly basis?
So when someone requests a room, we ask for the purpose of it. And we also ask if they're looking to charge charge people for it, and we'll inquire about that. So if somebody is saying, "Hey, we're looking to do a recruitment for XYZ," we'll look into that and ask more questions about it. So we try to do a little bit of vetting to see what the purpose of the rental is for.
So part of the challenge is we want to really be an inclusive community. We certainly would never discriminate, but we are having issues where certain groups are coming in. We have religious groups that are coming in weekly that are essentially running services. That is not something necessarily that we can stop. There's free speech, but it seems that one way to maybe address the fact that, and maybe we can look at how much the fees are, but I don't know that the intent of the community use is to allow specific groups or any group to use it, be they for-profit or non-profit or open or not. But you do have groups that may not be representing widespread community beliefs. And if they're using the space as an alternative to finding space that they need to, that they would typically be doing in a different type of space, and they're using this because it's free, again, we don't want to take away anybody's rights, but we need to have some way of preventing the community center being used as free space for organizations that may be inclusive but may actually not represent the values that we all have.
So, wait. So I'm gonna, because I remember being part of being in the public last year when this sort of part of the discussion was done in the budget process. It's interesting. I believe you said the same thing last time, and there was something similar in that regards, because I do agree with, you know, that's what it's called, community center. Sure, that's what it's called for the community. I want to go a little bit deeper than that, and I want to touch base in what it was said before about Market Square. So right now, Stuart, please help me out with this one. I know we just had an agreement with Farmers Market.
That's correct.
So are we talking about this being a group that is being exempt, or part of the exemptions that we won't be charging them? And so I want to go even deeper than that. Are we talking about we just had a big fair, the village fair, which is run by the Chamber of Commerce. So are we talking about charging them for the services and, you know, additional stuff that we utilize our staff, not just parks, but we have police and we have DPW. So are we talking about, is it that as a deep as a conversation that we're talking about, or is it just right now we're talking about Market Square in some groups and the community center and other groups?
So no, it's basically the same types of groups that are requesting the space. The issue, so as far as farmers market, that's really a license agreement with the village. So they do pay, so, you know, we are paid by the farmers market. The village receives funds from the farmers market. That's a bit of a different circumstance, and because the farmers market really is essentially setting up a business in Ossining that brings a lot of people. They shop other places. It's a little bit different than a community group using it for a different type of purpose. I'm not sure what the agreement is with the chamber and the village on.
It's a full contract though. They do pay the village. There's terms, there's
Yeah,
conditions.
so they do. So those are, I don't think,
Outside.
those are sort of things that really fall outside the parameters of what we're talking about on just groups coming to use space, and then maybe figuring out a way to provide, you know, to get space to do things that are, I don't want to say not inclusive of the community, but maybe not, you know, we can't necessarily stop a group because they are a religious group or anything else from using the space. But if we're getting the situation where somebody's using the space on a weekly basis because it's free space and they can run their organization from that, you're getting into an area where you want to at least set up something so that there's some fee involved. I don't know that a $25 fee will prohibit that or not. It's not, and that's the intent is really just to be able to make sure that we're maintaining some integrity. When you look at fees for spaces, we really don't, most communities charge and charge substantially, including communities that are much or sociodemographically similar to Ossining. So we want to, again, we want to be inclusive. I don't think that we want people sort of, I don't want to say taking advantage because I don't think that's fair, because that's the policy that we have right now. But it is maybe creating a situation where those spaces aren't really being used with the same intent that we have when we have open, free space for people.
So, so if, let's say this particular group that's being used in the community center on a Friday nights, let's say that the board decides and passes this sort of policy and the fees, this group stops coming in on Fridays. Is that room going to be utilizing for something else that you have programmed within the community center that you can use that you know, every Friday?
It could be. We are not letting organizations, they can't go in and book the entire year. So we're only doing it seasonally. So if we decide we want to add something on Friday nights, we may decide that we want to add something Friday nights for the fall program. So, but if we don't and the room's available and they ask for it, request, and it's an appropriate use of the room, meaning that they're not charging fees or they're not trying to maybe the purpose is for something that raises some red flags that we would discuss with the village manager or with the council, we would honor that request and issue a permit.
When a group comes in and it says, I want to book a room for the next 6 months, and it's a Friday or on a Thursday or Wednesday, what is the process on your end? How does that happen?
So we get that request, we look what the request is. So if it's for 6 months, say they ask for today and they want through the rest of the year, we would only honor the request up through right now through September, because that's when our fall program would start. Once we have our fall program in place, and if whatever rooms are available, they could then, as of September 1st, request those rooms if they're available. So what we don't want to do is set up a situation where every room could be booked and now we can't schedule any programs if we wanted to.
So, I'm sorry, you done? Yeah. So I'm just sort of listening to this conversation. Let me see if I could just break it down into 2 compartments, really 3. The issue of it's hard to differentiate, and what people say they do and their definition of what it is may not quite be what you think it is. So it makes it a gray area for people to make decisions. But I agree with Quantel. The $25 may or may not stop some people, or you don't know, right? But it seems to me that the community center should not be used as a place of business address. Non-for-profits come in all shapes and sizes, from the very poor to the wealthiest in our community. Universities, hospitals, lots of money. I mean, they're called non-for-profits. And then there's really the, I'm barely got a few bucks in my bank account kind of group, right? But it isn't really fair to expect people to, at your staff, to make decisions about who and what people are. It seems to me that we should not have a community center as a place of business, that if you're a non-for-profit, a religious organization, a motivational speaker, you should not be using the community center as a PO. Every Friday night, every other Monday, first Thursday of every month, do it at a restaurant, find a place to do your business, cut a deal with somebody, to pay for that and run your whatever it is. So it seems to me you could put a policy that says you can rent up to a certain number of times a year, and that's it, to solve for using us as a PO for your whatever it is. I don't want to just use the word business, because oftentimes not-for-profits tell you, or religious houses, not businesses. So the lexicon I may be off on, but the idea is an organization should not be using this as their post office, place of business. So you could eliminate that by simply not only not doing it seasonally, but actually saying you have a limit of 3 for a 12-month period. If you need more than that, I mean, you could to solve that problem. I think the cost for me, I thought, was different than what Quantel was sort of talking about, although I think you're right, that it's not going to stop some people, is that it's not clear to you guys that the taxpayers are covering the cost of all of the wear and tear, because it's not just a setup and a takedown. It's an excessive wear and tear. And we've had this conversation with the parks, right? There is sort of a right size to everything. We tend to sit here and talk about everything on one extreme and the other extreme. But the reality is mostly it's in the middle somewhere. So it seems to me you could put a policy and fees in place that limits a number per year that any singular organization, and no, they can't send another member of their organization, and by the way, you know, and do that. So that may solve for this continued, I don't know, I'm just trying to come up with a solution that is different than just charge $25 or $40 or whatever.
So I think one of the things that Trustee Casado was raising was, or at least when you said it, this is what I'm hearing. Is there anyone, because now we're talking about a particular group, right? Whoever the group is, right, that is coming in every Friday, right?
Well,
But
there's
that was an
more than
example.
one.
oh, there's more than one. Okay, so a particular
There's
group,
lots.
right? And so basically, you're saying is you can't do it like you know if this is the fall season, we already have our program laid out, and if a room is available, you know, our program is laid out, and so these are the rooms that are available, right? And so if they're available, then you can use them.
So my question to you is, are you finding that there are other community members who are coming to look for these rooms and are unable to use these rooms because there's a particular group that is using the rooms overly, like just constantly? Is that an issue?
We haven't found that, but I can tell you that the increase in the amount of room rentals has increased, meaning that more and more, this is happening more and more.
Mhm.
So this is what kind of started the discussion that we had, the three of us, about, like, is this what we want? Is this the intent? So that's what facilitated this whole discussion.
So you have organizations that, whether they're charging or not charging, businesses also come in different forms, are using the community center for programs that are pretty specific, because it's free space to do it. And because of that, it does in certain cases, and it's a little bit grayer than, it's a very gray area, because if it's blatantly somebody coming into a private sector selling a product, whatever, that's a pretty easy thing to identify. We do have a lot of groups that, and we all know, the different community groups and organizations that meet monthly at the community center. We have some community groups that meet weekly, and then we're starting to get groups that are sort of very specific, and they're using the space basically to run programs and operation that typically is not done in a community center. So what, I don't know that, again, the $25 would totally solve that problem, but it is a problem where it would be very hard to say, so-and-so does a great dance program on Friday nights and everybody's there, and it's okay for them to do it, but this other organization is operating a little bit differently. And, but there is an issue with organizations using the space in a way I don't believe is the intent of what we have. So the other options, you could limit, we did talk about limiting no more than once a month, for, which is similar to what Trustee Levin was talking about. We did talk about that. And again, I think there is an issue that probably one of the ideas of setting the fee, even though it's nominal fee, is that it does at least address the fact that somebody's not, at least there's some recognition that you're using space that taxpayers are paying for an intent that may not be what we all intended or what the taxpayers intended.
As part of this, do they have to be an Ossining register? If it's a not-for-profit, although I don't think it matters, since it doesn't matter whether you're a profit or not, do they have to be both individually or as an organization resident of Ossining?
Currently, they do not.
So anybody from anywhere can come in and use this, on the third Thursday of every month for, I don't know, whatever.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so that actually for me is a problem, because if taxpayers are paying for it, then the taxpayers from elsewhere should go where they're paying taxes and use those facilities for their, I'm not even sure for a fee. I actually think they should be using the place. So I'm in support of a fee for a number of reasons, but I just want to make sure that the problem you're solving for is the problem you're solving for, that's what the fees will accomplish. That's why I was interested in what Quantel was saying, because
a higher
if
fee
you're
would
trying
probably
to
solve
solve
it better.
for something, then
But then
let's
you would-
solve for something.
But the problem is, if you have a higher fee,
It's higher for everybody.
then it's higher for everyone.
That's
right.
the problem.
And if you're proposing a fee that offsets the amount of that the public taxpayers are paying for the staff to set up the tables and chairs, as it may be, I think the number was $25 for a room in the building and maybe $50 for a program at Market Square, then there's a good logic to that, because whatever's happening in that room is not part of the public programming. It's not a public committee. It's not a arts project committee. It's not Recreation Advisory Board. It's not the Green Ossining event that the village co-sponsors, and that's part of the reason the village co-sponsors it, is because they utilize that space and it's been determined as a particular program. So I get the logic. It's a public space, but the whole community isn't necessarily, the argument is, shouldn't be obligated to pay for the staff to be doing that when the staff could be doing something else that is part of the public programming. So there's just a couple of things I want to make sure are, like, there are some, I mentioned a few of the meetings that I presume would be exempt, like a village committee, and I don't know how broad that list goes. I assume the youth sports programs that work through the recreation department, you know, if JCOAS board is having a meeting or doing something along those lines, is that considered an exempt group?
Right now they are.
Well, we're talking about what we would do, so.
Well, I think that's another discussion.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Okay. Then my other concern is, and then if people are paying $25, then there is a little bit of a higher expectation of the condition that the room is provided in. The chairs and the tables really should be predetermined exactly how to be set up and what the needs are, so that, you know, there's not just an arrival and, oh, let's figure this out with whoever happens to be around. Like, we're committing the village staff to be attentive to that. And then when it comes to Market Square, some of the things, we actually changed our whole permit process, particularly for events that are planned at the last minute in Market Square for public free speech. So if people want to have a rally about DACA, if they want to talk about school funding, and if there's amplification that requires a permit, it doesn't necessarily require tables and chairs. So is that, if you're not requiring tables and chairs, and maybe if you're not requiring a setup of an audio system, then if staff doesn't have to provide something, can that still be free as it has been? For just people gathering and getting a permit, we're not adding a fee to that. I just want to make sure that's
And these
the
are
case.
also sort of like one-off.
Those are one-off events as well. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
The setup that we were looking at were with tables and chairs, the awning if they wanted it out, garbage removal,
Yeah,
such as that, where you'd have to
Market
have somebody
Square,
there.
I wouldn't even like put in the room fee reservation conversation. Market Square, I would put in a separate event permit thing that we kind of tabled because we don't really have that right now, because that actually requires setup and village materials and village staff and sanitation. It's totally different than if I host a rally for DACA or whatever. But that requires, what you're talking about are actual events or programming on the property at Market Square that would use our electricity, our awning, our chairs, that would bring in either XYZ. You're not talking about just like a yoga group that may just meet there with 10 people and set up a mat, or a protest with 20 people that are going to just talk about XYZ. A special event is one thing at a public space, because Market Square is not deemed as a park, even though it's managed. Previously in the village, we didn't even allow the recreation of parks to even permit that area. It was our manager and the board on a per application basis, because of how that property was used. So I just think that should be a whole separate event. Or if you just want to continue, if we just want to continue tabling the discussion about what a special event permit is, we could just use the template that we had for parks and renting a park, right? So you have to fill out an application, and what are your needs, and what are you bringing, and and then you and your staff and the manager, based off of what the village is A, going to allow, or B, going to be able to provide, would get the person, hey, listen, our basic application permit for Market Squares for a nonprofit event for the community is $200, but if you want us to bring, the 10 tables you requested and the 100 chairs you requested, and you want us to pick up garbage, and you want the lights to be up till 10 o'clock, and you want the, list goes on, then that's more of an actual process as to what their needs are and what your role is. Or you may have nonprofit or private groups that are just getting the space and they're providing everything on their own, right? So I would just completely take that whole conversation. That is a special event permit in my eyes when it comes to that space. As far as the rooms go, I'm okay with the fee. My only issue is that because of, and Stuart, I'm not saying you're wrong, but just that because my common practice and my knowledge is that, and I guess they are wrong now that I know, even though they do use the nonprofit and private entity status, like the library does and a lot of places do. I've used it all the time. Since we're not doing that here, that means that literally everyone or anyone using the rooms is getting a bill going forward. So it's definitely a revenue thing that we're going to be getting. And B, this is not, in any way towards you, but the definition of intent and values and what that means to certain groups using the space, right? And that just gets very touchy. So I don't really know. I don't even know how to like really analyze or vet a particular group. Um, and because I wasn't briefed on the particular instances or the particular entities or groups that were being questioned or possibly be, I don't want to use the word abusing, but not using the community center to our intended use. I don't know what our intended use means. So that's just something that I don't know what it means.
Procedurally, this would come to us as a change in the fee schedule, correct? So we would have another opportunity to revisit the discussion and get a proposed change to the fee schedule that would come to a legislative session. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Because we have discussed this for now 45 minutes, and we do have still.
No, I know,
agenda
but
ahead of us.
going forward, if we would have been briefed and I would have known the actual,
Right. So my point is we can have this conversation again. We've really, talked about it
it
from
should
a
have
lot of
happened beforehand. That's
perspectives.
all.
The decision's not made yet. So.
Just bad words. That's all.
And the Market Square thing, I think we haven't fleshed out as much as I think we have the community center rooms. Final comments on this?
I'll save my comments to that time.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill.
Good night.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
I'd like to invite our village treasurer, Tom Warren, up to the microphone to just give us an update on our accounting system.
Thank you, Karen, and good evening, Mayor and members of the Board of Trustees. In addition to giving an update on where we are with the accounting system, we also have an ask for the board tonight for action for next week, if the board is agreeable. But first I wanted to kind of give a brief overview on where things have been with our Munis accounting system. We had started implementation on that in about March 2016. As you may be aware, we had an excruciating time with the implementation. There were delays, there was lost data. It just didn't go well, but despite the challenges, we were able to go live with our general ledger and general billing, accounts payable, purchasing, and contract management modules effective January 2017. And we've been using those modules for the third year now. And we had learned from our experience of maybe we want to do things differently going forward on the next modules. The next modules was intended to be payroll in 2017, and no, that was 2018. And then we're going to do utility billing, the water billing in 2019, and then the taxes 2020. And that was, that was one of the things that our recent village manager had pointed out, was that why is it taking so long? And we had that discussion with Tyler, and that's just the way their software is implemented. It's kind of like dragged out because they don't want us to go too fast. So anyway, from what had been learned, we decided to pretty much bypass the Munis implementation team on payroll, and Dale, my deputy, had built the database herself, and we were ready to go with payroll in the middle of last year. But in talking to the village manager and looking at all these problems that we were having, and also the long drawn out project, plus the fact that users were unhappy with the software. We really hadn't vetted it. They were unhappy with the inconsistent menu screens and having to find things in different places on the menu screens. Also something that you may have noticed, since we produce a voucher detail report every 2 weeks, we're limited to like 40 characters to describe a purchase. And that's even magnified in the accounting records, because I'm still limited to just 40 characters to describe a journal entry, which when you have unusual journal entries, especially at year end when you start making accruals and such, to be limited to just 40 characters just doesn't, you know, we have to be creative on how we try to describe journal entries. So plus I've had discussion with some of the board members about the voucher detail report itself, because it was always listed in the voucher order number. There was requests like, well, why can't you sort it by vendor? We just weren't able to do that with the Tyler product. And also, you know, we had the difficulty in searching for records, and there's also the customer support issues that we were having. So in any event, you know, we had discussed it and we decided that, you know, maybe Munis wasn't the right software for us, and instead of investing more time and money on this program, we decided in early 2019 to tell Tyler that we weren't going to implement any more of their modules. Also, going back to 2018, we started looking at other software that was out there, and we've reviewed quite a few. And I also wanted to point out that with our other software that we've had all this time, KVS, that we use for payroll, water billing, and taxes, that's kind of like a DOS environment. It's, you know, very unuser friendly, and we're not able to you know, allow people to, you know, log in and look at their water account and such, you know, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to convert to a different accounting software program, so that, you know, the customer could log in and see their accounts. So in any event, we've concluded that we would like to go with Edmonds and Associates software. They're based in New Jersey, and we've had them here several times to discuss their software with us. And we actually had a 2-day work session back in May, in which we had the department clerks, and we also invited the department heads to come and look at the various different modules that they'd be working on. And we even had a lab session set up so that they could go and try out the software themselves. So we feel really feel that we've vetted the software program. We've talked to other users that have gone through implementation, and so you know, that's the ask. They presented a proposal for about $250,000, and which is about half of what the Tyler product was on the original quote, but that's not what we had paid Tyler, because we hadn't gone through all the modules to be implemented. But in looking at the proposal from Edmonds, Dale and I had decided that some of the conversion of data from our existing systems didn't need to be brought over. Like, for instance, on payroll, if we get a request from the retirement system to run a report of employees' earnings history, we're going to go back to the original software that we ran the payroll on, so that we know that that data is correct and not something that was converted over to Edmonds, that you'd want to go back and check on KVS to make sure that it's correct every time you go to run a report. So it's almost like, aside from carrying over 3 years of account balance data for revenues, expenditures, and balance sheet accounts, we're not going to bring over any of the detail, because we have the detail already on the other software, and we can sunset that software by dumping the data into some type of a format that can be queried. So our budget is down to about just over $200,000, $200,080 for the software, the conversion, implementation, and the training to be split between the town and the village. We computed the village share at $127,480, and we already have $51,645 remaining funds in our existing Munis capital project. So that would just leave the remaining balance of $75,835, which will be split between the general water and sewer funds. A larger share is charged to water and sewer because, that's a utility billing. And that's one area where we do want to bring over several years of consumption data so that when we send out the bills, the customers would be able to see a history of their consumption for comparable purposes. So we're asking if the board would authorize the manager to sign a contract after review by Corporation Counsel, and to also provide the funding to help us go forward with this software, and also what we'd be discussing with the town, a similar conversation for their participation in the program.
Who wants to start?
Stuart, did you get our money back?
I was going to ask the same question.
Oh, it's number one on my list too, so please, thank you.
Did you get our money back?
The answer is no, not yet. We did get money back, however, from Tyler, right, Tom, this year.
Right.
We got, I forget what the numbers, I have it upstairs, but we got money back from Tyler with regard to this year's account.
Okay.
And they have paid us back, we got a check from them, am I correct, Tom?
No, we actually short paid them.
We short paid them.
And then they agreed to that even though it was in March already, they agreed to give us or to not charge for the whole year for the maintenance and program updates. That was a value of about $35,000.
I'm sorry, how much, Sal?
I think it was about $35,000.
Are we still where, I guess, following Quantel's question, where are we at? What is the time frame you're thinking that we should be getting all our stuff back, if anything?
That's like this, I tell it, if I were the judge, I would tell you that you could have it right away, but we're not there yet. So I can't give you a prediction as to when you might actually see money from them. I just don't have an answer for you.
So, Tom, I know you and I had discussions about this since 2017, pretty much, regarding to the software and how difficult has been for you and your department implementations, and especially bothers me the most where we had purchased some additional stuff that we haven't even been utilizing at all, just throughout the village. The town, because we do have an IMA with the town, and you do their accounting as well. The implementation with all that stuff, I mean, do you feel comfortable enough with this particular software that we should not, in 6 months from now, you're not gonna have any issues with this? And I just want to make sure we are doing.
I think we did our homework this time, but before we were relying on, a prior village manager who thought that this was the greatest software. I remembered it from about 8 years prior. I knew it was considered the Cadillac of software programs. I just find it hard to believe that after all these years, you're still limited to just 40 characters for a description. You look at what technology allows in terms of, sending out text messages or tweets.
It's more like a beeper, like the beepers that you can just have some characters, and now you can send text messages as length. All right. So one of the things that I really, because I had spoke to a couple of people, and I was anyway. We originally what Munis was, you'll be able to access your water bills, and you'll be able to see all this stuff, and that never really happened. Talking to Dell, believe this software or this program does have the ability to look into that, so you'll be able to pay your water bill online. You'll be able to
Yes.
pay your taxes, village taxes online as well.
Can you do that now?
Yes, but we're using a different software. We export our unpaid tax bills to this other program, and people can log on and pay it, and then we exported back to our KVS software.
And there's a fee involved that's much more substantial than what we can do when we pay our town taxes, where we can do it directly. We can do it from our checking account, and it's like $1.50
We have
flat
that
fee.
now,
Okay.
where we have the same $1.50 transaction fee for an e-check.
For e-check though, not for a credit card.
Oh, yeah. Okay, no, but
The credit
but if you
cards
can pay
is-
online in some form or fashion, then and it's only $1.50, that's fine. I didn't realize we could do that.
Credit cards is 3%, but that's what the bank charges, and that gets charged back to the.
Yeah, no, I understand that. We're not allowed to eat the charges the way a
Right.
for-profit business does.
What will be the implementation for this software? Time frame?
Dave said that okay, it's already July. There's concern that if we wait until September, that we won't be able to go live with the general ledger in 2020. Right now, we've already talked to them about that. We spent so much time with Munis setting up the chart of accounts, because that was one of their big ideas, was let's spend a lot of time and really think about the chart of accounts and how it's going to be laid out. We pretty much told Edmonds that we would just like to give them the chart of accounts and have them implement that. And so we save time with that. We can easily, export the 2017 and 18 fiscal year data and give that to them to have them, put that in the general ledger. But, they said that it's still not too late for us to have the general ledger up and running in early 2020 so that we'd be able to use it for the whole year. And that was sort of our experience with Munis, was that, okay, yes, we're live January 1st, but we were still using, the KVS software to pay the checks for the old year, because that's where the original data was input, and it would probably done the same way here. Payroll could possibly be live January 1st. We don't want to implement taxes right away, because right now we have the means to allow people to pay online, and taxes, and especially the water billing, is where we're spending most of our resources to convert our data over from KVS, so that all the tax roll numbers match between the water parcels and the tax parcels, and also bringing over the consumption data. And because we're billing throughout the year for water, every month we send out a new billing, we can start that module at any time during 2020 when it's ready to go. And then hopefully taxes might be ready for the second half of 2020.
I guess sort of my last question. When you spoke to other municipalities that have this system, what was their feedback in regards to customer service after they did the implementation?
Yeah, it has been very positive, and that's one of the biggest things that we talked to about them, and the frustrations with the customer service. And they've assured us that that the customer service is there and available, and that they'll answer the phones and get back to us right away. And the other municipalities that we've talked to, it's been the same answer, that they're getting the information that they need if they have a question.
This question out to Stuart. In regards to the contract, if we can if the board agrees to move forward with this particular software company, is anything that we can put in there where we have them some sort of penalties if they don't respond, or help Tom some sort of way within the time frame?
Yeah, I have, Trustee Kazat, I have this, and Tom was kind enough to send me a copy of their contract. So, I mean, we can always put certain things in. As Tom noted, they want essentially really all the payments just about up front, by December
Sounds familiar.
24th. They're looking to have everything put into place. But there are some questions that I have with regard to the contract, so there are things that we'll have to discuss with them in terms of what they put in, because they also have a separate agreement with regard to hosting fees, which are separate fees. And then, of course, there are their annual fees for just, upgrade and maintenance, which we have to figure out what those are.
Wouldn't we own it? Why would we host?
Actually, we had talked to Craig about this. With Munis, we have our own server, and it's updated pretty much daily. But recently Craig has become a fan of, having the data hosted in the cloud. He really feels.
Whoa.
But hold on a second. But we paid for that server that Unis hosts, right? We bought that server
Right, but we
specifically
host
for
it on
that.
the cloud. To your point. What?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
and it's backed up
Right.
to the cloud. It backs
Yeah,
all
we
the
manage
back.
all that. That's my point.
You still have to pay for hosting, whoever the.
Yeah, we pay a lot of money for that.
That was what Stuart is asking. He's going to ask them about that.
Some of that.
I will, I'll,
some of
I'll
that
I'll
stuff.
bring that point
Oh,
up.
well, he didn't say that.
Thank you.
No, he did. He said, I'm going.
I'm going to ask, but thank you for also being more specific. on
Thank
it,
you, because
because-
I was listening to Trustee Casada. Appreciate it.
I think the concern is the payments up front is where we were with the last company.
Right, and Dale and I talked about
And
that, yes.
it's really unbelievable, and it's and quality is very difficult to discuss, right? So it's really hard to, as much as we'd like to get money back, as long as vendors maintain whatever they say they do, quality is a real tough gig, and I don't like your customer service is a tough gig because that's, a qualitative issue. But the idea of paying people, like, who does that? Seriously. I mean, you get nothing. I mean, you're paying for something, it's not a building. I mean, you don't get anything. To pay things up front so that you have no leverage, Stuart, is, there's got to be a better discussion. This is why we're having this conversation now, is that we have no leverage against the last one because the money went that way. It's just really frustrating. I don't know if, like, who does that anymore? Just pay everything up front. Because when you don't get what you want, exactly what is your recourse? Nothing.
The Munis philosophy was we
I'm
gave
not
it.
talking about them. I'm talking about where we're going now. I don't care. The past is the past.
Well, it's even in this way. The software is there for you. And that was a rationale for why it was built up front. And we could possibly reduce the scope of the contract and then do a second contract when we're ready to go with the next modules. That's always a possibility to try to limit the amount that's paid out.
So, I share concerns that were just expressed by Trustee Levin. I think we learned that paying up front just doesn't work for the village of Ossining. We just can't take that risk again. I couldn't possibly support investing upfront for another financial software program after we haven't even been able to claw back the hundreds of thousands that we need to this whole discussion is so beyond frustrating. I can't even express it in words. So if we go forward with Edmonds for, is it payroll, water, and taxes that we want to do with Edmonds?
Well, initially it would be like the financial suite, so that we're up and running with the general ledger, and then payroll would be right behind that, and then water and taxes would be at their own speed.
So when you're saying the general ledger, is that all the stuff that's on Munis right now?
Yes.
So we're leaving Munis entirely. That's the plan, is to walk away from Munis, transition what's in Munis to Edmonds, and that would be the first round of what we do with Edmonds, and then add these other programs to Edmonds.
Mhm.
Okay. Meanwhile, we'll continue to pay the maintenance with KBS, which I don't know, how often do we pay? We just paid $33,000 to
That's
KBS.
the maintenance for the next 12 months.
So that's an annual maintenance. So
Yes.
that's whatever it is, less than $3,000 a month. And so that's going to continue because rather than transitioning
some
over all the background data, we'll maintain. Yeah, eventually it becomes obsolete, I suppose, to some degree, and we can just.
At some point, we'll sunset it, and it won't be supported. There's, I think, about 20 years of payroll data on KVS, and that's the important data that
Yeah,
we have to
it is.
capture.
It is. It's unfortunate that we have to keep spending, $33,000 a year, which is only going to continue to increase for.
Except for the fact that
numbers
we're
don't
using
change.
that software for water, taxes, and payroll.
So
right
when
now.
we stop using it, when that all transitions to Edmunds, whenever that's online, then the KVS maintenance fee will go down. It will no longer be $33,000 a year. It'll be less.
When we decide that we don't need it anymore, yes.
But we'll still need the historical data.
We'll need the historical data, which you can export.
We can export. So then we will have less that we have to depend. The KVS bill will eventually go down.
It'll be. I'm sure it would be zero within a couple of years.
I'm sure it would be zero within a couple of years. All right.
Hold you to that.
And
Couple
there it
years.
is.
And Minas would be hopefully zero sooner.
Okay. So then I was just looking back. You usually send us a memo explaining all this stuff. So like I've been taking notes, but I'm not finding an email with a memo that has like, because at one point it was like 250,000, and then really the village portion was only 128, and there's some that's left. Could you document that for us before we?
I wrote a memo and I gave it to Karen. I think she got it yesterday, and
Okay,
you
usually
know,
gets circulated.
I left it
to
up to her to send around. One thing I didn't want was I didn't really want that memo on our website.
Okay, this is Karen's second work session. We're learning how to communicate. Okay,
I apologize.
so it helps us to follow along.
Is that because of potential pending litigation that you don't want it on the website? You do want it on the website?
What's a proposal?
I think that
Or
I think
or
what
is
I
it just an
talked
internal memo?
about was pretty much what was in the memo.
Okay.
I don't know if it has any impact on litigation.
No, that's fine. All right.
I'll let Stuart decide that.
We will distribute it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Wow, Karen, Tom really put you in your place there, didn't he? Okay. Is there any other comments for
It's
Tom?
okay. It's okay.
Learning. We're learning.
I guess the only thing it will be with Stuart is whenever you get a chance to review the whole contract.
Yeah.
And then if you can just give us a quick report and what that means.
I'm happy
and then,
to. It's actually it's far less descriptive than the Munis contract, Tyler contract. Tyler had things in terms of what do you do if you have disputes between the two.
Mhm.
This is silent.
And that worked out real well.
Um,
So sometimes less is more. We'll see how this one goes.
In any event, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you, Stuart. So Tom, for us to make a decision at some point of time, sure, what will be the latest for you to be able to accomplish everything that you need to do in regards to the transition by the end of the year? When will be? Is it 2 weeks from now? Is it 3 weeks from now? Is it a month from now? When should we have you come back, I guess, or having another discussion? Because I don't know do we have to wait to another work session?
Well, you have continuing business at every
that's-
legislative meeting,
that's
so if you
why
want,
my-
you could do it at that point as well.
What is your anticipated timeline? What would be helpful to you?
I was hoping to, sometime in the next month to get them a contract.
Well, then I guess I'll leave it up to Stuart and Karen to, how much time you need to go review the contract so that if we bring it to a legislative session next week and we discuss it in continuing business, we may or may not be ready to discuss it, or do you think you need more time than that to be able to review and recommend the contract?
I can certainly review the contract for you folks for next week's session. That I can do. In terms of getting the resolution, that's probably going to be 2 weeks hence after you have your discussion. So
Okay, then let's just put it on for the next work session, and then we can vote on. I'm just looking at the calendar here. So we're talking about we'll put it on for we have 5 Wednesdays in July, and I think people probably want to enjoy the 5th Wednesday. So I will have a work session on the 24th and finalize the discussion and then put it on for the August 7th legislative agenda. Is that a good time frame for you, Tom? Does that make sense?
I would have to see if Edmonds is, thinks that that's just stretching it too much.
And I not to put more pressure into either Stuart or Tom on this, but after you review the contract, we're going to put some sort of our input, but you still need to have the discussion with them.
Of course.
So that may not happen within the next
Yeah.
couple weeks, to be ready for that. So I just want to make sure that you guys sort of go over and like how to discuss time wise.
I know you don't want to hear it, but Edmonds may have to wait. Basically, that's what we're all trying to say. Sorry, I'm just trying to be very.
And we're doing this in partnership with the town,
Yes,
right?
correct.
So I don't know if you've
Yes,
spoken with their counsel, because I assume we want to be consistent.
I have not spoken at all with the counsel for the town on that, no.
So I think time wise, you guys need to figure that out in regards to, how do we approach this? As
Okay.
much as, I'm actually in support. If you're happy with our program, I'd be happy to support that. Because
Edmonds just says that not everybody implements on the first day of the year, and oftentimes, payroll, you think of like, that's the ideal software that you'd like to implement on a calendar year basis because of all the IRS reporting and such. The next option is to implement that, either at the end of March or June, to do it quarterly. My thought was that if we continued processing payroll on KVS, a couple of payrolls in January, then we could use those as the parallel payroll to input on Edmonds to see if you're getting the same results, with the hope that maybe payroll would be set to go in February.
Okay. And, the reality is we could rush this and do it 2 weeks earlier, but I have a feeling that these things usually take longer than anticipated. So January 1st is a nice goal, either way, but
I mean,
not likely perhaps.
with all the coordination that I think needs to happen with the town and their admin staff as well. I don't, again, that's what I think is required for you guys to go back and talk among yourselves and be like, figure out a time frame and then sort of give us a guideline on what we do.
Okay, good.
All right,
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Next, we're going to have a discussion for the honorary street renaming on a go-forward basis, including the renaming of the corner of Croton Avenue and Sherman Place after Jim Drohan's father, who worked there as a crossing guard. So I'm handing over to Corporation Counsel.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. I sent around to you an email earlier this week about what Ms. Lisa Ferguson, who's the paralegal in the office, came up with regarding some of the street naming requirements. And I should point out that what we were looking for was what you see in ordinances, not necessarily policies. If you actually go and do a search on E-code, the city of Albany is prolific in naming street corners, streets. They do it virtually every 6 months. And reading those resolutions, it does not appear that there is a necessarily petition that is submitted or that there is a required number, but it simply has that particular person had some connection to the location that they proposed to name. In one case, it was for a young child who had been tragically killed by a car but lived within that particular housing area that was there. Another was named for a former city council person, and this was a street within the district that she represented. But again, in the municipalities that actually have ordinances on their books, most of them, all of them require a petition process. 3 of them that I mentioned in my memo, which would be Peekskill, New Rochelle, and we have one other place, the town of North Hempstead, which is out on Long Island, require a set number of folks to sign off. I also gave you what is the rule in Community Board number 3 in Lower Manhattan with regard to what they require. And they all do want a certain percentage, some go as high as 75% of people who live within that street. The Community Board is very clear that if you're naming it after someone who you're looking at a corner, you need basically homes on either side of the particular corner. Beacon is different. Beacon requires a petition, but does not require any set number of signatures. Their view is, if you come before us and we think it's okay. What is the case with each of those locations is that the petition would ordinarily come to the board. I believe in one of the cases it actually goes first to the Highway Department, and then it goes generally to be it the Historical Preservation Commission or one of those to review in terms of whether or not the person should be honored in that way by having the particular street name. I should point out it is an honorary secondary street name, so you're not changing the name of the street. You're just putting up basically a second sign for that particular location. What most of these places require is that the person has lived in the area for at least 5 years. It need not be 5 consecutive years. And that the person have some connection to that particular location. Some of the other, New Rochelle, for example, I believe it also has for naming for not-for-profits, but we're not going in that direction immediately right now. They require the not-for-profit has to have their main office in the city and be a presence in the city for at least 25 years as compared to an individual. The procedures are basically really what you want to do. You don't have to do it by ordinance. You can do it by policy. And you simply want to have someone present an application as Mr. Drohan has done here. And you can consider it either, as a board here. You can ask another board to look at it as part of perhaps their designated responsibilities. And then you can ultimately just make a determination with regard to the honorary name of that street. So that's basically what the process is. And I can tell you that throughout the state of New York, there are only these 3 municipalities plus Community Board number 3 that actually have procedures that you can find. Again, Albany, it's obviously they have a policy. And what their policy is, I don't have, but it's clear from looking at the resolutions. Someone comes before the board, makes an application, explains why the person should be there. Their resolutions are fairly detailed up in Albany. They go, one went on for 4 pages, detailing all the activities of this particular individual. They, as I said, again, it's secondary street names, and this was only with regard, as we looked up with regard to street names. So it's not with regard to parks. This doesn't deal with anything else. This is explicitly as to secondary streets.
And it's worth mentioning, you mentioned parks, and Rika might be able to speak to this. We've just recently implemented a process for honorary names in parks, and in fact, we just recently approved by resolution the honorary naming of the skate park at Snowden Park. So in that instance, we have the Recreation Advisory Board, as people can come and propose to them, and then they make a recommendation to the village board, or in the case of a town park, the town board. And for streets, we obviously don't have an existing board that could act in that way other than us. But I don't believe that the parks have any sort of petition process. It's really just a proposal for consideration to the appointed board, right?
Well, they come up and they come up in front of the board, who meets once a month except in the summer, and they are asked all sorts of questions. I thought the board actually did say they want, I thought it was like 10 years. I mean, they have a sort of parameters that they wanted, how long you have to live, that you have to be, if you want it near someplace, there has to be a relationship between that person. Being a really great person who's lived here a long time and has done lots of wonderful things actually didn't qualify with them. You have to actually have a relationship. You're like a coach at the baseball field for 15 years. It had to be a relationship, not just that you're from Ossining and you're a really wonderful person who did wonderful things. So they sort of did in that number of years. And I didn't even think about the consecutive because I don't remember if that was part of it. It sort of was implied, but yeah, that's a good point.
And it's interesting that Albany, you said obviously has a policy, and there could be a lot of other municipalities that have a policy. They just don't do it as frequently as
I
Albany.
think that's correct. Or the places do it, but it just does not make it into their minutes, which, the Sun Muni Code, they had other honorary things, but not street names.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the thing. If going through this process and with the Recreation Advisory Board, that's I assume a policy we established. We didn't do that by code, right?
No, policy.
Okay, so the thing is, if we don't right now have a policy. We've named 2 streets during recent years since, Manny, you were here for Chief Burton, and I don't think you were here for Reverend Cofield.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
so and those came about in very different ways. And the thought process by the board was very different. It had been a very long-serving police chief, and the area that was selected was reflective of a walk that he took every day, and it made sense, and it was adjacent to the police station. But, that wasn't brought to us by the community, and I don't know that it would have been kind of, I'm not really sure if we had this petitioning process where we had to get 70% of the residential units along those blocks. It may never have happened. I mean, same with Reverend Cofield Way. There was discussion about where would we have Reverend Cofield Way, where would it have the greatest impact, where would it be, where would it make sense? It was, a block adjacent to where the church had been when he had been the reverend, so there was a logic to it there. It's, it's a highly utilized block. But again, the request came from members of, in that case, Star Bethlehem Church, which is now located down the, much further down Spring Street, and it wouldn't have necessarily been, he was the minister for 30 years, but that was, 20 years ago. So the people who live on that block now wouldn't necessarily have had the same desire for. So my point is, I'm not sure that the petition process of the people in the neighborhood in either of those instances would have been a really valuable contribution to our consideration, or, we just might not have ever named them, if that was a requirement. So I'm a little concerned about putting that as a stipulation in this case.
Understood. And as I said, from reading the various resolutions passed by the city of Albany, there's no reference at all to numbers or anything. It's specifically about the person and their connection to that location. That's what's very clear reading all of those. And I think that could really formulate your policy. If that individual has a connection to that particular location and you think it's warranted, you could, then the board could make its decision on that. You don't need to go out for what is a much more involved petition process of, getting 65, 70% of all the people in the area and, seeing people sign it. If, this board, thinks that person has an important connection to a particular street, a particular location. Again, it's a secondary honorary street name. The board thinks it's warranted. It can do that. Whether the board wants someone else to opine before you decide, that's another decision you can make. In other words, as instead of a rec advisory board, do you send it to an HPC or do you send it there? That's
in the case of Reverend Cofield, we got a report from, and both written and in a meeting from the village historian who did some research, because most of us weren't around when Reverend Cofield was in his position with the church. So what we don't have in place, because we don't have a policy, is like the Rec Advisory Board. They had a public meeting, and in that case, it was actually quite well
I was just going to
publicized. We
say,
don't have
like public
a public
feedback,
hearing,
some
and
sort of public
yeah,
feedback.
both in a public meeting and in writing, perhaps might be an opportunity to have
I
a
mean,
public
not the
weigh in.
petition, but some sort of public feedback.
Right.
Yeah.
May I? Sorry for that. May I ask something? Because the discussion is pretty much, the discussion we're talking about is regards to resident came in and asked for the naming of the street. So we have Jim here. Is it possible for him to kind of come to the mic and explain? Because a lot of people may not know what this.
Let's do discussions first. It's the process and then his request.
But we don't have a process.
So
Right, exactly.
Right.
That's why it's
Why-
first.
Why we're that's what we're discussing right now. So what the process is, but it was this application that it's prompting the discussion.
So could the process, because I agree with you. When I started to see some of your policies, some of what other communities are doing, particularly 70% of real property owners, I was like, well, that doesn't work for communities that are heavily rental, right? And then there are other things. And again, I'm just imagining knocking on doors and someone saying, hey, will you sign this? And they're looking at you like, what are you talking about? But that might be, as you were talking, I was saying, what if that was the process? Like we do have a village historian, so like what if the process is, hey, a community member go, submit something to the village historian, then that community member and the village historian, after, coming up with some type of research, presents it to the board, and then boom, right? Then you're kind of done, and then the board can actually make a decision, right? Because there's the storyline, there's the community member. Now the greater community understands, why this person is, important, and then it's simple because when you start getting into petitionings and having people have to go knock on doors, it gets complicated, and depending on the community that you're in, it just may not work
And
out.
and ultimately it would be a resolution you would pass, which
Yeah.
would be in a public meeting. So if someone wanted to come in at that time,
Absolutely.
say anything.
Yeah,
Read it
I'd like it to be
beforehand and
earlier in the process.
Right.
Once we have the drafted resolution, but yeah, definitely public. But yeah.
So, it's funny, we all read things so differently. I'm always amazed at why I love these meetings. So I read that piece. The petitions didn't make sense to me, more to the point of so much of it is historical. Renters, owners, it doesn't matter. The average American lives in their house 7 to 9 years in this country. Doesn't mean that's what's in Ossining, but 20, 30 years later, the odds are you're not just one family away. You're like a couple. The great thing about naming streets is it's educational. People oftentimes do sit there, they go, you're at the stoplight, you look at them and go, oh, who's that? Like, maybe you're Googling them. Yeah. It's very honorary. It's like, oh, I now know something about someone I didn't know before, and that's like really cool. I think the concern is always, and I always think the concern is how do you say no, right? Like at the end of, we haven't said it out loud, but somebody walks in here and we don't agree that person, how do you say no when you said yes 5 times before? Like, what do you use as a barometer to saying no to one individual and yes to 4 others? So when I read that petition, you know what it did? It triggered something else, which is what is the purpose of those petitions? It's to get the community who's going to have to look at that sign, they're the closest people, and be okay with that. I don't know if they thought about what you just said, which is okay, but they don't even know who those people are. And then there's the logistics. It occurred to me that one of the issues is the permanence of signs. And, more and more namings of things, including buildings, and you see this all over the city, is not into perpetuity. They have 10-year limitations on them. There is a way to do that. I happen to think signs are great. They're not street signs. They don't go on the GPS. The only reason we really need a policy is I don't know how to say no to a person who thinks that their grandfather who went fishing every day and helped kids cross the street, or I don't know how to say no to. I don't even know the person, to be honest. I mean, and I've lived here, 25 years at this point. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I think the village historian idea is nice because at least she has an expertise in looking at things and saying, oh, in the context of something. I saw the crossing guard thing, and it occurred to me that there are lots of crossing guards. And if you do for one, how do you do for others? And the only thing that came to my mind is, so what if we have lots and lots of signs? They do that in Albany. They have lots of them. Like, how bad would that be anyway? So I think
3 people, right? That
I
had
mean,
had a
think of at
connection.
least one more. That would be really nice.
Yeah.
no, so I'm saying, like, what would be the worst thing? That we honored different people? I guess when you run out of streets, you do a tertiary sign because they're not
Sidewalks.
actually. I don't know. I'm not making fun of it. I'm
So,
like,
no,
what
no,
would be
I
so
think
bad
in the
about
city they
honoring?
have that.
I'm sorry?
In the city.
Yes,
in
they
the
do. I
malls,
just
they
saw
have,
that
like, a
actually.
different, like,
Plazas.
I
Yeah.
sort of flipped the whole thing and said, what would be so bad about honoring a bunch of really
We make our signs in
active
house. So it's not that
people?
expensive.
Right. So I'm out with the petitions 100%. I'm even like, I'm not going there at all. I think it would be nice to have a third party, so it's not, whatever, but it doesn't have to be us, any board. We would not be sitting here having a long discussion about this, to your point about who really knows the people. I love, and the Park and Rec was like really good about listening to the people, having conversations. I love the idea of a village historian sitting with the person, okay, tell me the story. They lived here, they did this, why they did that. I'm going through that. And just say, this person, X number, I do think there has to be a minimum of number of years they resided here. I think there has to be a connection to the place, which is what this petition, or not
It's very
petition,
specific, yeah.
specific to that really works for me. I actually don't see a downside to doing this. Really, what would be so bad if a lot of people came here, as long as we had a third party to at least say to them, look, you know, you got to have some reference. It can't just be because it's a nice person. It's got to be. I don't know. I mean,
I like that. I mean, it's you know, if we had like a one-page application that would be forwarded to the village historian, if the village historian is okay with processing and
it's not like
producing a
Well,
report
maybe
to the
that'll be-
board.
Maybe that'll be
We
like
just
a
put that as part of the policy.
Volunteer them.
That's
No,
a-
no, no,
They have
no.
no choice.
No, but to keep it simple, so a one-page application, it goes to the manager's office, the manager refers it to the village historian, and the manager then present it in a report, and then we discuss it and deliberate. I'm just
So I think
taking
we
steps here.
have the start of a policy to be drafted to come back to our next work session. And let me just acknowledge what Trustee Quesada was referencing. Thank you, Jim Drohan Jr. for being here, and another family member as well. And it's your proposal that has prompted this conversation, because we part of our goal, those of us on the board right now, is to really formalize and institutionalize some of the actions that come to us. And doing it for the parks was an important step, and now doing it more broadly for the village streets is an important step. I happen to live on Peter Falk Place. I look out and I see that sign, and I think it's lovely. I know exactly what house he grew up in. I didn't live there at the time that they named it, and I don't know if my neighbor said it was a good idea or not, but I think it's lovely. And I also I knew your dad, Jim Drohan Sr., and both of my children walked from my house to Roosevelt, and he crossed them, and actually he got ill during the time. And then when he passed away, my fifth grader was very sad to learn that Mr. Drohan had passed away. He remembers what a very nice man he was and how much he really loved that position and keeping the children safely crossing the street on the way to school for so many years. So it's very it will be a very touching memorial, I think, and I'm really glad that you brought it to us. And thank you for your patience as we consider how to go about this in a more formal process. So what I'm hearing is we're going to draft a policy that we will then discuss again at our next work session in 2 weeks. And a policy moves forward much more quickly than passing legislation. So if we agree on a policy in the next couple of weeks, then we can move forward with providing a more formal application, which you'll be able to come back to us, and then we can consider your proposal. So that's it. Thank you very much. And when we get to that point, then I think we will have some public discussions, and we're gonna want to hear from you more formally then, after you are able to give us the written proposal. Okay. Does that sound, am I hearing everybody
Sounds good.
correctly? And then, Stuart, whatever proposal of a policy you send around, maybe we can circulate it by email first, and then we'll discuss it.
I'll also touch base with the village historian just to make sure that.
For sure. Yes.
He or she can, yes, in the future.
Yes, in this case, it is at this point a volunteer position, and we
Happy
just
to.
happen to have a journalist who is in that position right now. We don't always have somebody who enjoys writing, but I think having a written documentation of why this street is being named the way that it is something that then goes into the minutes when we pass the resolution and is significant, and maybe we want to find a way to have that be more accessible. Like you said, if somebody's at the stoplight and they look up and they Google somebody, it'd be nice if they could find the information in the resolution, if that was a findable document on the village website.
So I would like to just append to that. In order for that to happen, it would be best, and we talked about this in Parks and Rec, that it's not just in the minutes. The minutes, there's no metadata in the minutes, and Google doesn't do the search on that the way it's being posted. It would be best if somewhere, whether it's a historian or somebody in the village staff, once agreed, does a little blurb, so that eventually, and probably within 6 to 8 weeks, Google will actually pick it up, and then it's there so that people do see, and then it does become an education. We frankly should do that with the historical signs we have as well. It is not okay to take a photo and put it up because search engines can't find it. You have to use some keywords, maybe the person's name, crossing guard, or a sign or something, and we should, that'll create a digital library, and eventually we should do that with the parks too, but we need to find like maybe some student so that it becomes, the minutes just aren't going to get picked up in the search engine, but a little blurb will.
Mm-hmm.
We actually can't upload any pictures onto the website without putting alternate text on there. It's an ADA compliant thing. So when we put up a picture, it says exactly what it is.
Right. I'm just
requires a
suggesting
caption, right?
do a
Yeah.
little, do a write-up, and then it'll be, and I don't mean to be pointing at you, it just reminds me that it's, the purpose here is also to educate 10 years from now, 12 years from now. I mean, that's the purpose.
I look forward to those street signs all over the village now that we make this more fun.
Are they a different color, by the way?
They are.
They are, right? They're a little.
Depends
yeah,
on the
I see.
neighborhood.
It
In my
depends on the
neighborhood, it's
neighborhood.
blue. Downtown, it's
Oh, we
black.
have neighborhood colors. I
Yeah,
wasn't
the
aware.
historic downtown has its own
Color.
color. Yeah.
Oh, that's why. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah. I live in a less historic part of town, so it's just blue.
For now.
We can landmark everything.
It's really
Or I could
nice to
move.
be walking around and find those signs because, you know,
It's nice.
it's like a little historical treasure hunt. So I want to now give you an update on where we are with the consolidated funding applications. As many of you know, New York State puts together a round of funding that's really focused on economic development initiatives, broadly speaking, and these come out in July. So we are in the process of drafting 3 grant applications with a consultant that we also work with on the DRI. So those applications are, we're looking at the Green Innovation Grant Program, and this is for, we're submitting for the water treatment plant roof. We did submit this last year, and Hazen and Sawyer was involved in putting this grant together. We've evolved the roof, and in terms of its environmental sustainability, resiliency, and we think we have a good opportunity. So we are redrafting this with enhanced plans around the roof that we think make it more compelling for this particular offering. So this they will award between 40% and 90% of the project cost, which is usually it's not a spread for a match, but we're hoping, we're hopeful that we can get this. Last year, I think the grant request was about $1.2 million. We're still working on that, so I don't have the final numbers. And one of the reasons that I want to brief you on these grant proposals is they all require a match, and the match needs to be, the board will need to sign or approve a resolution so that we know that we understand that there's a match requirement for these grants. We are working through the grants as we speak, so I'm hoping that by next week's meeting we'll be able to have the full grant asks and the resolutions that would facilitate that. So the other grant that we're looking for is this is part of the New York Main Street program. It's remediation of 200 Main Street for adaptive reuse. Again, we looked at funding for 200 Main Street last year. This is a slightly different category offering, so we think we have a good chance. The Main Street offering is a 25% match, but what's interesting about this is that it really is talking about downtown stabilization grants to assist with environmental remediation and associated construction costs to remove obstacles to the building's near-term redevelopment. So examples would include asbestos management, soil, vapor intrusion, mitigation, construction to stabilize the building. And the building must be in a target area generally of that requires some reinvestment and in a community with more than 50% of the residents with income not exceeding 90% of the county median income. So we meet those criteria, and it would be good. Again, I think the ask amount last year was $500,000 for this project. We're determining what we're going to ask this year. It would require a match, but if we got the money, we would go ahead with the remediation plans for the building, and that would definitely facilitate its future use. So, and because we also talked about this building in our DRI application, a lot of the things we're talking about actually all play into things we talked about in the DRI, which is revitalization of the Main Street corridor, using this building for an adaptive reuse project that will facilitate economic development within the community. So the third grant that we're looking at is losing my paper trail here. So the third one is strategic planning and facilities feasibility studies for parking. This would be a 50% match. This we have not requested before, but as you know, parking is a big issue. And in looking at parking, and it's come up in other conversations we had about the need to find innovative solutions to parking. If we do redevelopment downtown, we are looking at reducing surface lot parking in some areas and increasing density. So what does that look like? It's going to take some creative solutions. We also have an issue where we know we need to upgrade our meters. So this really, we've identified the business districts. So it would be the metered parking on the street up through Croton Avenue all the way down Main Street, looking at the parking, the surface lots that we have. The objective here was to be somewhat broad, but not try to boil the ocean, but really focus on the parking that will best facilitate economic development. And also parking in the aqueduct lot and how we use that to celebrate the aqueduct and do something innovative for parking. So it sounds, you know, like when you're doing a grant for parking, like a little bit dry, but it's actually a very, we have a good story about the need for parking and ways that we can use parking to just really connect or facilitate people coming downtown, certainly, but also use it to, you know, much like we did the Sing Sing Hill Greenway to kind of celebrate some of the things that we have that are unique to Ossining that happen to be either in or adjacent to parking lots. So those are the 3 grants that we're working on, and as I mentioned, we'll have more information. We're literally, the grants are being formulated as we speak, so by next week we should have, and I don't know that we'll have we probably have a rough draft and identification of costs, and enough so that we could do the resolutions that are required. The grants are due on the 26th.
Did you say that the parking's part of a Main Street thing, so it's only for downtown, or did I misunderstand?
No, it's what we're looking at is a business district, so it would be metered parking. We would include the sections up on Croton Avenue down through Main Street. So it's really a business district because that's where you really need the innovation.
Just meters that go through Spring Street, does that include? It's just anywhere that there's existing meters?
We do, yes, we do go on down to Spring Street all the way almost to Broad Avenue and then around State. So, and then waterfront too, in terms of the waterfront parking. So we really look at all the sort of metered, tagged parking that we have.
Good.
The first one, absolutely. If we can get that 40 to 90%, you said funding possibly for the first one for that roof would be fantastic. The second one, of course, I mean, for 6 years, I would say the majority or everyone here has been trying to really get that building up and going. The third one, I kind of cringed at a parking study just because it's a parking study. But I feel like we've already, through past research or experimenting or analysis and or consultants, we kind of know what the possibilities are, what the options are, but is this more kind of to just bring it more up to date, or?
It would bring it more up to date and really focus it on the more of the innovation and implementation of it. So we did actually discuss like what's been done, not reinventing the wheel. And we also wanted to identify, it's a long list of grant offerings that you can choose from. So we really honed in on the ones that made the most sense and the ones that tie into what we want to do for economic development, revitalization, particularly in the business corridor. So in looking at that, we really looked at sort of taking this the next level, and really it would be sort of an extension or an offshoot of the comprehensive plan, which I think again is going to reconfirm what we already know about parking. Yeah. But this way we may be able to bring some more technical expertise and really looking. We know what we need to do, but we're going to have to be quite clever about doing it. And what can we do that we haven't even thought of in terms of being a bit more innovative?
Okay. And my last point was we were going to be updating our meters and our parking structures regardless, and that was already in the works, and it's still in the works. This would just supplement that.
So these grants are awarded in December. What you can't do is the way these grants works is they don't want you to expend money before you get the grant. However, we are going to continue discussions on metered parking and things like that too. We just would have to be sensitive before committing funds that we weren't doing anything that would undermine. So we're taking that into consideration as we're writing the grant.
Okay. And with that said, I would like, this is kind of towards Mayor Garrity, to get a full update as to where we are, where we have come in the past year as far as the parking meter conversation and the replacement and the options. I know that internally we've had conversation and we had updates on that from the police chief.
I don't have any secret insights.
I'm not saying you do. I'm just saying that for the public's sake and for the board's sake,
you mean to include in an
just to
upcoming
have
work session?
a discussion as to where we are, if we're even at that stage yet.
So
just
I
to
mean,
get an update.
I could kind of answer that. I don't know, coming in just now, it is something that the chief and I discussed last week, and we followed up on a discussion today. So we would like to start talking, identify a time to meet at the, probably like end of this month, early next month, where we're start bringing all the relevant players together to look at there were a couple options on the table. There's things that we probably could be doing now that I don't think would inhibit this grant. And so we are bringing that discussion up, and it'll bring me up to speed with where everything is, but it really is something that we are prioritizing. So
Great. Yeah, I just wanted to come to the board for the public to see, because we were part of that process publicly last year.
So I don't know that much has happened maybe since then. That's my sense, but what we definitely want to light a fire on that under that, because it's an issue that we have to address immediately. It's a potential revenue source for the village, and it's something that will facilitate commerce in our business district if we have easy, ready, modern parking.
Sounds good.
So
I got the sense
No,
you did.
I was literally going to ask the same thing that Omar had asked in regards to the conversations of the parking meters and where we are at with that. There's a couple of stuff that is sort of related but not related to the topic. I'm actually so if we do get the grant, I don't knocking wood.
There's no wood here.
Okay, yeah.
There's wood over there.
we go like this if there's no
yeah,
water.
definitely.
That's what they did in my house.
So you said December,
December they let you know if you got the grant.
and then what does that mean? When do we get the money, if anything?
It's a reimbursement grant.
Yeah.
So we can do implementation in January, so to speak. We can start working
So
on
it depends on once you award it, I think usually you can start doing it, and then you can record things that are reimbursable. You usually can't reimburse till the contract's, and again, it's how the state decides to run it, but typically how it works is you usually can't be reimbursed until the contract is signed, and then the approval for the funding is given. It's a bit of a process, but typically once you've been awarded the grant, there's some preliminary signatures that go back and forth, and then you can again record things that you can then apply to the grant once the funding becomes available. It's usually a few month process.
So we're working with the grant writer, and it's a grant writer who's helped us recently with the DRI, and so she's hopefully familiar with the CFA process. And so one of my questions, and particularly with the application for the parking, which is a strategic planning grant, it seems like there's more than one. There's sort of two pieces of it that we're combining in this application, and I'm wondering, and when you go through the CFA process, do they ever say, because they can with CDBG, so with CFA, do they say, all right, we want to fund this piece of it but not that piece of it? Because to me, it's very different if we're talking about strategic planning for how to consolidate parking where we have the Brandreth lots on both sides of the aqueduct, because that's a complicated place. We have a drawing that was done 15 years ago with a proposal which is completely out of date, and that's not how parking is done anymore. We also have the DRWC did a field trip down there and made recommendations in their report for how there could be parking decks established, and then utilization of the top of it that might be either open space or and if this is a strategic planning grant, it's focused on economic development, the goal would be that we would be opening the door to be able to have development in Market Square. When we had all those conversations with HCR and with the county and everybody to talk about going out to RFP for village lots, the big obstacle for the Market Square lots was it's going to be so incredibly disruptive to our downtown to just start construction on these surface lots unless that parking has been already replaced. And so
Right.
to me, it's an incredibly easy leap to say this is an economic development grant. But I think you said celebrating the aqueduct was how do we make the aqueduct pedestrian trail an inviting connection between Main Street and the community center? To me, that's a planning grant that we need help with. We can't just say all agree this is a good idea. Yeah, but to me that's very different than talking about how do we most effectively implement a better system of metering from Croton Avenue to Spring Street.
So we had a discussion on this yesterday with the grant writer. The idea was we talked about the scope of the plan, and their recommendation is broader is better. Okay. What we decided to do is really look at this in strictly, more concretely in terms of economic development. So that's street parking, that's lot parking, that's creating parking structure parking, and it's all. So one of the things was a lot of this is what's going to be what people are going to embrace in the neighborhood. So we talked a lot about the fact that we have a lot of residential space in our business district, which is not necessarily the same in other communities where their business district is very separate from their residential district. So part of it was talking about, okay, how do we make sure things, so you have the aqueduct that sort of runs through the back part, behind Open Door. So how do you, we wanted to be sensitive that we have assets that we don't want parking to disrupt. So that was just an illustrative example of one of the challenges that we have to parking. I think the bigger challenge, though, is really what are we going to do if we take the surface lots at Market Square and the post office away? So it's the issue here is we're developing, we're creating more density, and we're taking away parking, and how do we put that back and facilitate this in a more meaningful way that also doesn't create a separate issue in terms of things that don't that take away from the aesthetics of our village and the walkability of our village and things like that. So that was more of an example, but I think the focus is just looking at this comprehensively, and that we develop a plan that takes into consideration that these are all our sort of business parking options. How do we optimize this in light of development? And particularly, I think a big issue would be the redevelopment of Market Square. And
does it include the municipal lots in the area, like the one that's on Spring and Academy? There's one that's right up
we
here.
Talked about Tracy had provided them with we have maps of all the lots, and they're aware, and we're working with them. So it was really taking sort of all the existing parking into consideration, and then looking at what does that mean in terms of, and then the idea would be that as this is identified and parking is going to be a concern of the comprehensive plan, this potentially allows us to do a deeper dive on the technical innovation part of it.
Okay. All right. Great. So hopefully we'll have a resolution next week to vote on, and thank you for
if there's
helping
any
us better
change,
understand
if
that.
there's any change in that, we'll facilitate some sort of that's the goal. The goal is to do
And
that.
the green roof, I'm very glad we're redoing it because it was actually identified last year as a priority project, and then the application for the CFA didn't quite match with what they were looking for. So I'm glad
and we did get input from the state on that too. So I think we have
learned
a
from
better
that experience. Good.
Of course, you learn from every experience. So I think we keep our fingers crossed, and we're happy. We're cautiously optimistic that we will get these grants.
I just want to note we do have the attorney here from Hudson Step, and that's the next item on here. We've also been meeting for 2 hours. Do people need a break, or can we?
You're ready to roll through.
Let's make it truly a biology break for just less than 5 minutes. Okay. We'll recess for 5 minutes. You all good, Tom? And we're back. And now we are welcoming Stuart back to talk about Karen, talk about Hudson Step application for special permit. Where are we with that?
Yes, thank you.
There was a
Thank you.
meeting.
There was a meeting on June 27th. Trustee Bazemore, Trustee Herrera, myself, and Corporation Counsel met with the developers at Hudson Step, and we, Trustee Bazemore and Trustee Herrera proposed that they'd like to see greater affordability in the set-aside. We talked about a 50% AMI requirement for the set-aside. And this was not something that the developer felt was feasible based on their financing at this point. We also talked about, we had a lengthy discussion about the need for affordability in Ossining, the concerns that we have about the negative implications of gentrification, displacement of people in the community, understanding that the people in the community that surrounds Hudson Step want to, I'm sure everybody wants to see something done, but you also want to know that it's going to benefit you in some way. So what does that look like? So we also talked about the opportunity to, what it would look like if there was a buyout of the affordability and that money could be placed in the village's affordable housing fund. And we talked about it. The current buyout fee for that property based on village code is
$7,125,000.
$7,125,000. Previously, it was probably about $3.7 million before the board changed the buyout fee schedule. The developer went back. They called the following day with they made an offer to do a buyout, a firm offer of $2.2 million to be placed into a fund for affordable housing. Corporation Counsel, Kahan, and I did not think that that would be feasible because it's substantially lower than what we had been asking for before we raised the fee. And we talked about, other ways that we could maybe address this issue, but I think it's really up for the board to discuss what the, based on that. These are very, very firm offers from the developer, so there's not a lot of wiggle room for negotiation.
Once you informed me of $2.2 million, I was no longer interested. I don't think there's no possible. One could accept it, but it just wouldn't. It defeats the purpose of an opt-out fee. Anytime that you are when you have an inclusionary zoning policy, you do it to increase levels of affordability and integration. That is the purpose of it. And so one of the reasons that people typically set an opt-out fee as high is because you want to discourage the actual non-integration of a building. At $2.2 million, I have my own personal views of what that offer actually means with respects to developers' true commitment to actually building something. But it wasn't something that I thought was a valuable alternative. I mean, it was a important conversation to have, but I think ultimately that the project will be what the project is going to be at this point.
Yeah, the meeting, I think, was very productive. Manager Torrey, I think, summarized it pretty well. I thank the developers for taking our suggestion and bringing back an offer so quickly. They were willing to work with us, but it was an offer, and we did have parameters, and they also have their limitations. So at this point, this is where the conversation, at least for me, in this particular process for the special permit stops, and I'm fine with it going to a vote.
point? We're not voting tonight, so.
No, we're not.
No, I mean like when it does
Right,
come up
yeah.
for.
So, Stuart, couple quick questions in regards to the special permit.
Yes, sir.
We had discussed before in a time frame. Sure, we put a limit to the special permit. Either we can agree now, or that could be put as a part of the resolution. But my suggestion will be, we have the zoning board resolution that it gives them 6 months. My suggestion will be to do the same thing for the special permit. My question to you is, initial question to you is, putting, let's say this developer gets all the permits, or all we grant all the applications and all the special permits that they need to sort of move forward with this particular project. Within 4 months from getting all the approvals that they require, they decide to sell this project to a different developer. What happens then? Do they sell the property with all the approvals?
They
Or
would
is it-
sell, the approvals would follow the property, so they would sell, that's what would make the property more valuable, because you would have the approvals at that point. So the answer is yes, the buyer would essentially get those approvals, and if they have not expired, they're able to, they can proceed. You know, they could pull a building permit based upon that approval. They could do what they have to do. If they needed extensions, they would then have to go for those extensions, with regard to those approvals. But they would, but a prospective purchaser would get those approvals, yes.
Okay. Can we add, because there's 2 building permits that they need to pull for this particular project, sure? Because that's what they did in the past. They have a building permit for the historic house, for restoration, the demolition of.
Right.
And then they have sort of like the main building permit for the rest of the complex itself. Can the special permit have a clause within that both of those building permits they need to be applied, or they need to obtain within those 6 months?
I was looking at that. With the way the code is worded, is it has a cutoff date by when you have to get the building permit. It doesn't actually say by when you have to, finish the building permit. In other words, a building permit is good for, if I remember correctly, I have it here. You have to complete construction within 18 months of issuance of the permit, and you can get an extension on that. Generally, it's 12 months, but because of the value of this project, it would be 18 months. Your question, though, is can we impose, or could you impose a condition which says you have to get a permit, you have to pull a building permit within a particular period of time?
For
both Smith Robinson as well as for the overall project.
Correct.
You could put in a condition that would say that they would have to do that. I should point out, just with regard to the building permit, and Trustee Quezada, they still have to revise their plans with the ICC.
Yes.
So they're going to have to get that done. That's the International Code Council, which is where they were before. But that could be done. With regard to your suggestion about imposing a particular time frame with regard to the special use permit, the answer is yes. All the code says is that the permit, that they have 18 months to basically pull a building permit, once they get the special use permit. But you can set conditions which include, putting it out that they have to do it within a particular period of time. As of right now, the zoning variance they received was on June the 13th, so that would, they would need to have construction started by the 13th of December, and if they don't, they would have to go back to the zoning board. Their site plan is actually a little bit longer. That's 1 year from the date of approval to get a building permit, and that was only issued on June 25th, so they would have till June of 2020. But you could say, but you're going to have to pull your permit by this date. You know, you have to do this, you have to show this progress. You can have them come back and let you know what's going on. But you can say, for example, when do you got to pull your demo permit by? You know, when do you have to, you know, have that part of your process complete? When do you have to pull your building permit? And then, you know, that would start, you know, different clocks in terms of building permits as to when they have to actually have the project done.
Sure. And I don't know if the rest of the board feels the same way, but I think I will feel a little bit more comfortable if we put some sort of milestones dates on this particular project, because again, with the history of this project, we have done extensions in the past, and we just keep doing extensions and extensions and extensions.
And if this board will remember, the board members who were here, after the first special permit was granted, I think the second extension was 3 months, and the last extension, I believe, was a month or 2 months. So they were cut back, and which is certainly the prerogative of this board to do.
So are we at a stage where at the next legislative session, we would have the opportunity to vote on the special use permit again, the special waterfront permit?
The answer is yes, and what I'll do is I had a resolution from before. I will rework it to put in some of the sort of milestones that Trustee Quezada was talking about. I will circulate it to everyone around here so you folks can see it. If there are any comments, obviously let me know. But the answer is yes, we would be in a position to do that.
And I just want to comment on the discussion that this started off with, talking about the potential change for affordable housing that was proposed. At our last legislative session, there were a number of community members who came and spoke at the public hearing, requesting that there be greater consideration to the needs of the neighborhood to have more affordable housing, the needs of the community at large. And I'm really glad that that conversation happened, even though it didn't result in any change with this particular project. It's really important to push that conversation forward. We've had conversations over the last 2 years about how to change the village's affordable housing program to be more accessible to the people of our community, because right now 10% set aside for people at the 80% area median income is not attainable for most of the community. The median income for the village of Ossining is very different than the median income for the county of Westchester, and 80% area median income is beyond the reach of most people in Ossining, particularly the people who are struggling to find decent quality affordable housing in our community. So what was proposed for people at home would be that if there's a buyout, then that 10%, which in this case is 19 units, would no longer be included in that property. If they had agreed to the existing fee, or there had been a negotiated buyout fee that the village could agree to, which $2.2 million was a non-starter for any of us, but the $7.125 million that is in our existing code, you know, the idea of setting it very high is to discourage people from doing it. But if we were able to come to a number that would actually be of value to the village, where we could really do something with it, we were all open to that negotiation. And putting that in an affordable housing fund would mean that the 189 units would all be at whatever they wanted to rent it for, but there would be a substantial amount of money that would be accessible for the village to direct toward some quality affordable housing that could be developed somewhere else nearby in the neighborhood. And inclusionary zoning is something that's really important, and it has been transformative for affordable housing in the country. In the village of Ossining, where there's a lot of housing that's really, you know, we're just over 3 square miles. So whether it's in one building or it's 2 blocks away, it's still really contributing to a healthy balance of affordability in our community. And so I'm sorry that that conversation didn't go further in a direction that could have been constructive, but I'm glad that the conversation happened, and hopefully it's just the beginning of some more important conversations where we will no longer find ourselves in a situation where people complying, you know, developers complying with our bare minimum requirements for affordability is not meeting the needs of the community. So it's just highlighting the shortcomings of our affordable housing program as it stands today. It's 13 years old, and we know that it needs to be updated, and hopefully the comprehensive plan will be the pathway to making that happen.
Can I just add something to that, though, Mayor? But we also learned that the 80%, said the 10%, 80% IMI also is not 80%. It's something that could be part of a planning board, which should be
Yeah, that's just the
it's
minimum.
a
Yeah.
negotiation point. That's
Right.
that's the top. So there is some projects out there that, again, as a part of the discussions last legislative session, was, we need to make sure that the planning board, the planning department within itself are aware that it's not 80% set. It could be, that's more like, that's the top that we could get. We could definitely be part of a negotiation of a particular project. Could be less than that, could be 70, 60, 50%.
And the other big piece of this conversation is that it was introduced just a couple of weeks ago into the conversation in this way. And what was highlighted again was that we really need to update our notification process, because sending letters is what we require of developers, and they generally send certified letters, and we have documentation that the letters were sent. But what we don't currently require is signage at that location, and I think that is something that would be much more valuable, and is a requirement in some communities. So whether it's a lawn sign and just says the next planning board meeting is on this date. Yeah, well, we've talked about it, but we haven't done it yet. And
can
I
we-
think if we had done that, then these concerns could have been brought by community members when this came before the planning board X number of months ago, and maybe it really could have been integrated into the plan rather than coming to this point where it comes to the village board for a special use permit, where it's it's not as directly related. They've already gone so far through the process. Really, this time for this conversation was much earlier in the process when the site plan
We
was
can
being
actually
considered.
have that on for the 24th, because that research has been done.
Excellent.
I was going to ask.
So we'll discuss that update in 2 weeks.
Because we had asked to be part of that work session, and unfortunately we didn't have an agreement. So I'll be glad to see what Tracy has come up with, because that was something that she brought up
She has it,
early in
and
the year.
I also have some
Is
of
she in
the,
town on the 24th?
She's back on the 22nd.
Perfect.
and I have what some of the other municipalities do with regard to that, with their signage.
Okay,
So
that'd be
we can
great.
put that together.
Excellent,
We're
thank you.
looking
Well,
for that.
that's a good outcome to this conversation. Happy to hear it. All right, we'll look forward to seeing that next week, and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Annie.
for your patience.
Thank you. All right, next is a discussion, the extension of the water IMA with the town of Ossining, and I hand it over to my colleague,
Thank you.
Wright.
Folks, the IMA with the town for water expired on the 30th of June. The town last night passed a resolution so that we could enter into a memorandum of agreement to extend it for an additional 2 months, which would go to August 31st. That's to allow for some discussion about some of the language. What that relates to is that there will be, I think, a grant application later in the year that relates to the new water treatment facility, and the thought, and it's been indicated by the Hazen and Sawyer folks in some of their discussions that some language in the IMA that relates to the water treatment facility and the relationship between the town and the village would be helpful in terms of pursuing that grant, which was not successful last year. So we have that language that they've proposed. I will be discussing it with the town council as well, and hopefully we can proceed. But what the memorandum of understanding is, essentially, we remain at the status quo for the next 2 months, which is the town unincorporated portion is paying 1.5 times the rate that is paid by the village.
And the reason for the extension is because we need that time to be able to massage some of the language so it's more appealing for a
Right,
grant application.
and my understanding is that the plan would also be, that Hazen and Sawyer would actually, in addition to our looking at the language and the town looking at it, get the input from the Department of Health and from the DEC, so that if they, because they're, ultimately they're going to be the deciding folks with regard to the grant. So if they like the language, it would be good to have it in there. So that's why we just want to give us a little extra time. This is not part of the CFA process, so it's a grant. They haven't even announced the due date yet, but it will probably be later. It'll certainly be later in the year.
Okay, good.
Well, the round, this is the Greenway round. I think they're thinking August, September, we would get the announcement, but we'd have time between, as long as we can get the language resolved. We would be in good timing to submit that, so.
Okay. But there's no language change for us to consider at this point. So at
No,
this point, it's
ri-
just a
I-
perfunctory extension.
There's some words that I had to work on it myself first, so, and I've also asked, some other folks to look at it. What I will have for you next week is just a resolution authorizing,
Extension.
sign an MOU to go for an extra 2 months.
All right,
So
that's
we
easy enough.
Stay where we are.
Okay. Electricity?
Okay. Now we have proposed local law 4-2019, revision to chapter 114, electrical standards.
Yes. This is a revision which I've discussed it with our building inspector, Joe Augustinelli, and with my deputy corporation counsel, Sonia Tanksley. It would revise the current section 14-15 to make it explicit that an electrical permit must be obtained before work is started. Our code currently says that the master electrician shall obtain a permit, but it does not actually say when he has to get the permit. So we want to be in line to make it sure that it's got to be before you start the work. What this revision also does is put in certain work that does not require a permit, changing a fuse, changing a circuit breaker, replacing lamps, plugging something into the wall. Before, we didn't have any of those exceptions, so that would go in here now. I know the mayor had asked me earlier.
Pick a law that doesn't exist.
The mayor had asked me earlier about dimmer switches, and I had a discussion with the building inspector today. The concern with dimmer switches and any switches like that is it does involve wiring, and some of the wiring could be more complicated than not, and generally his thought is that he would prefer that not be included in the statute to allow that, but to allow what we have now is replacement of lamps, fuses, or circuit breakers, or connection of portable devices to suitable permanently wired receptacles. The code would also now require insurance coverage to be provided by the electrician who is applying for the license. It would be a $1 million policy to be provided, naming the village as an additional insured. That $1 million should not be an onerous requirement, because that's what the county requires for these folks to get their license in the first place. So if they've already got the $1 million, they can simply change and name
Why
the
do they
village.
have to why do they have to list us as additionally insured for private?
We do that on demo permits and anything
do?
like that.
Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
it's our standard practice is just to be there.
They won't find it onerous because it's just what they do, right? This
They
isn't-
have, they have
this
to
isn't-
anyway.
this
This
isn't
is
Yeah.
his point. But just,
And the county requires it, with
Right.
regard to theirs. So this is just essentially to make it a little tighter, so that in the future, we don't have any issues with regard to issues with regard to these permits, because when we write OTRs, Otis to remedy, and we write appearance tickets, many of them include a failure to have an electrical permit, or an electrical permit on a timely basis. Now, it can be clear that it has to be, and it has always been that you had to have it through a master electrician who is authorized through the county. If the board will recall, we previously amended this chapter to remove the provisions that provided for the village to actually certify the electricians, because we now go through the county's Board of Electrical Licensing. But now, this would just, makes clear when it is, and also those particular instances where the permit is not required. So, the building inspector, the deputy corporation counsel, and I thought that this was a good thing to put into the local law at this time.
So I want you to be kind of like very clear. So if a homeowner wants to put in some switches, they need a permit.
Yes.
So here's a problem: you can't enforce it. Like people can choose to do that. How are you going to enforce it?
Well, the question is, do we really want to enforce it?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no.
So,
clearly,
well,
with this
Well, I
one,
will tell, where this will come up is if somebody is selling their home and they should, and someone should do an inspection, and they go to check, was there, oh, that looks like a brand-new outlet, or this, did you get a permit? Then they're gonna have to come
So,
back.
so here's the problem. This is when, like, when you start including electrical switches, this is when people start saying that the village is out here for money grabs. Like, this is a bad. I've lived in units where it used to be I would get a shoestring, right, to pull the light on. Now, when the owner got tired of the shoestring falling on the ground, he decided to install a light switch. It was
And
the
you were
best,
happy.
and I was happy. But if he had to go turn around and actually,
You'd still be pulling on that.
you know, go file a permit, not the house I live in right now. But if he still had to go file a actual permit, it comes like
Pay a master electrician to do
and
it.
pay a master electrician for something that you don't necessarily have to pay.
Well, but I just want to make one point. I don't hold myself out as an electrician. This is what the building inspector has recommended, and this is also what you see in virtually every municipality. None of them include switches. They don't mention it.
So I guess
So are we mentioning or we're not mentioning? I'm told.
We're not mentioning switches, we're mentioning fuses and circuit breakers.
so we're not exempting it, but at the same time, is it something that comes up? Maybe this is a Joe Augustinelli question because it's very specific, and this is, like, I understand the village not wanting to exempt something that could be dangerous because that's, puts us in a bad position if somebody gets hurt, and we've said it's okay. But at the same time, the example I used wasn't necessarily installing a light switch, but like, if I want this to be, yeah, it's a replacement, like, in my kitchen, I decided I want a dimmer switch, or I didn't want a dimmer switch. I go to Home Depot and I buy a little box and a case. And yes, you do have to turn off the breaker. You do have to have that much knowledge about electricity to not electrocute yourself. But when they come in and inspect my home, are they going to know if it was a dimmer switch or no? Of course they're not going to know that. But the village isn't going to say it's okay to do it. But also, what I don't want to create is another obstacle to somebody being able to sell their home because they have to prove that they had a master electrician for every light switch in the home. We're not creating that.
That will only come up if a title company raises an issue or an inspection raises an issue. I mean, we're not going into someone's home to say, oh, by the way, did you change that outlet? Did
Right,
you
and
do
that's
this?"
just not the
That's
stuff
gonna
that
happen.
comes up, right? I'd just like to be reassured by Joe or somebody who does that that's not the minutia that they
But
look
it
at.
doesn't come a problem until it becomes a problem. I think that's my only issue with it.
Why do we need it? I mean, I'm totally confused.
What exists right now, we're exempting
Supposedly,
you're exempting some
Building
things, but.
department has recommended it. Joe, he recommended
Yes.
it. Essentially, that's why it came up to us.
I have a couple questions and concerns. Yes, I would love to have. Sorry, thank you. I would love to have Joe or the building inspector be here because there's a lot of technical questions that, regarding to the codes and things of that nature. So sort of like an overall question, we're talking about electrical permits. What do we have on the plumbing? Because we do have a plumbing permit. Is that the same thing? If I change a faucet, if I change the toilet, if I'm replacing a toilet, do I have to get a
I'm not
building
wor-
permit?
with-
So I know, so.
With all
so
due
to me-
respect, I'm not working on the plumbing permit.
no,
right now.
I know that. So, but is that gonna come? Is
may.
that something, so again, so to me, to have a more like a sort of like all these questions that we are having, I think having our building inspector here, it would be helpful for
Well,
us
just
to.
so
to
you
kinda
understand,
move
though,
forward.
you can only change one code at a time. In other words, I can't change plumbing.
So we're talking
and
about
electric-
electrical right now, so,
Yeah, because
So-
I
came
cannot,
up.
a local law can only be
Correct.
for one particular thing.
Which is
I
fine.
mean,
So again, so there's this topic electrical, and there's a couple other ones underneath that, for Maple Place and a Liberty,
Invite
which
Joe in.
would I think would have been helpful for us to have the person either Tracy because of some of the stuff maybe planning, or in this particular case is Joe because he's the building inspector. So to me, it would be helpful for him to be in part of these work sessions, conversations, and I think if moving forward, my recommendation will be for him to be present in these particular cases.
Just
Has
think-
to be briefed.
I just
Correct.
think,
Yeah.
I think light switches should be included in the exception.
Why don't can we invite Joe to come on this 24th meeting is getting exciting. We got a lot of good stuff on there.
Can
He can
you
come
be
next week.
next week? As
The
a-
legislative
He's
session?
away?
He's away.
Okay, then I guess we stuck into next work session.
Okay.
Tracy's away too.
Next week?
Vacation season.
Mayor, can you say next?
I'll have him here on the 20th.
He's writing his little notes. So next up is 4 Maple Place at 8 Liberty Street.
Thank you. This is a request by me, actually. These two properties will be requesting, and one has already informally requested, and the other as part of an HPC process, license agreements to construct, in one case, a wheelchair accessible ramp, in the other case, a set of stairs, both of which will encroach onto village property. In the case of 4 Maple, there is currently no encroachment at all, but in order to get into the property, they need the ramp. I can say that the ramp has, and the design for the ramp has been reviewed by the building department, by Paul Fraioli, the village engineer, and by Joe Tremelli. Paul and Joe Tremelli had no issue with regard to the engineering with regard to this, that there is enough space between the end of the ramp and the edge of the remaining sidewalk on Maple Place, sufficient for pedestrians or other individuals to get by without any problem. But in order for the individual to access, and 4 Maple Place has 3 residential units and a commercial unit, to get for someone in a wheelchair to get in, the ramp is necessary. And so what the proposal would be is that they would construct a ramp which would be approximately 5 feet 6 inches in width by about 12 feet in length, and it would be, directly in front of 4 Maple, and they would require a license agreement to do that because it would be within the village's right-of-way. This is similar or analogous, I should say, to what was done previously on Bellevue, where the person wanted to construct retaining walls and came to the board before he did the work, unlike the previous ones where we've recently had where the work was done after the fact. So that's 4 Maple Place. 8 Liberty is in our Sparta Historic District, and in this case, the applicant was at the HPC meeting on earlier this month. On Liberty Street, all of the homes, the front of all of the homes is right on the property line. There is no front setback. And the house at number 8 currently has some concrete stairs which already encroach upon the right-of-way. What is being proposed is to remove those stairs and to put in what has been described as an appropriate wooden staircase, more consistent with the type of building that is there now. There was a discussion by the HPC. That was approved by the HPC at their last meeting on the condition that there is a license agreement obtained from the village's Board of Trustees, because it again would involve an encroachment onto village property. So those are the two. I can say 4 Maple Place is not yet before the building department. It's only been informally presented to the building department. It will not require any planning board review or anything like that. And 8 Liberty Street, the only place it had to go would have been the HPC, and they did approve the certificate of appropriateness, subject to the condition that I mentioned before. And again, both of these would be looking for license agreements to allow their encroachments onto village property. And as I said, in the case of the Liberty Street property, there's essentially no way to avoid an encroachment at the front of the house, because the stairs literally come down right into the street. So they just can't avoid it. And in the case of Maple, it's needed to provide the wheelchair access for both the residential as well as to the commercial space.
Yes, sir.
Please.
So, 8 Liberty, the stairs and sort of what they're doing, I guess me personally, I don't have an issue with it, since that the HPC has reviewed it. I mentioned to Stuart early today that I noticed that there's some building codes stuff that need to be addressed, and I will leave that to the building department hence, and if there's some major changes based on the building code, they may have to go back to the HPC, depending on how our building inspector reviews that. So me personally, I don't have a problem granting an agreement with them. I do have a problem with Fort Maple Place. And I'm in disagreement to me giving an agreement to this particular project. Not only that, but this project in particular was renovated not too long ago, and the architect didn't notice that they needed a ramp. That's one thing. Two, if you look at the whole, regardless of this enough clearance for a path of pedestrians, putting this additional ramp in there, to me, if you look at the whole neighborhood itself, that's the last building, commercial property, and then everything else is residential. If you look at the consistency of the neighborhood, this ramp is just in the middle of everything. Far as I know, I don't have a recollection of seeing a ramp being part of any of the sort of that district, or the, I don't want to say he's the part of the downtown, but it's so close to the downtown that I haven't seen that in any of those neighborhoods. Now, my experience in New York City and the only municipality that we have had an issue with ADA compliances, what we have to do, or what I have done in the past is we take over the ownership of the sidewalk and we ramp the sidewalk to the level that is required. The other option that I have seen that we have done in our retail businesses where we have to comply with ADA code is we ramp from the sidewalk to the inside of our space to comply. And we design within that compliances. Right now,
Wouldn't that block the sidewalk?
no, from the sidewalk, from the edge of the store.
Okay, the edge.
From
okay,
the edge
yeah.
of the store, and then we ramp into the space.
Okay, yeah.
So there's no ramp and the sidewalk.
Okay.
There's no obstructions within the sidewalk itself. So to me, on this particular case, the best solution, because if I didn't even drove by there before I came to the meeting, and if you look at the Google images in there, you can ramp the sidewalk. It's not that much of a critical space, and especially because you're utilizing the steps in there to use for ADA purpose and the store. So to me, I will disagree with putting a ramp in there.
So is your thing more like preference and what you feel your definition of consistency for street is? Just because you actually have experience in this, that's why I'm asking.
I have not, again, and if you go to New York City, they won't allow that to happen.
Well, we're also not the city though, but
I know. But if you go to White Plains, you don't see that happen in White Plains.
we're also not a city, but yeah. But I get what you're saying. And
if you want to be consistent with it, what the character that we're trying to present, to me, it's just not, it's not suitable for that neighborhood. It's not suitable at all. Again, we are, what we have done in the past. So, this in New York City is obviously there's also provisions within the building code. There's an existing conditions. There's an existing building code. It says if you have an existing space, you don't need to comply with this, and this. Sometimes they make you put an ADA bathroom, but there's no accessibility to that. So there's some things in the code that makes no sense.
But wouldn't a ramp be on a need-by basis, or like there wouldn't actually be a consistency of ramps because most people don't get ramps unless required to or needed?
Correct, and that should have been looked into the beginning.
Okay.
Because this is an existing renovation building, sure.
Yeah, right.
So they should have looked into this when they were trying to do renovations of that space.
What is it that you want them to do? I mean, it's one thing
Change the
to say,
design.
it's one thing to say, I'm not
To
in
me,
agreement.
it's like,
but
so
what-
there's
what
two
is it that
options.
you're
There's
asking
two
them
options
do?
to me, in my eyes, there's two options. Work with the existing sidewalk and slope the sidewalk to meet the requirements that they need. Or, right now, their main complaint, or the main reasoning for here is, to me, from my understanding, was to get into the store because the store has an ADA bathroom that now the customers cannot use because they cannot enter. So
Where did you get that from?
Stuart, is that just all due respect? Is that our role to go into design specs and preferences, and whose role is that?
Well, all I can say to you is this, Trustee Herrera, is I sent the plan to Paul Fraioli and I sent it to Joe Ciamelli. To both of them,
They were good.
From an engineering perspective, they did not raise an issue. They said the distance from the edge of the proposed ramp to the edge of the sidewalk was sufficient and met ADA compliance. They said there may have to be some tweaking in terms of the overall, perhaps the width of the ramp itself, but they did not pose any problems, and I confirmed that with Paul yesterday, and Joe, as I have a short memo from, Joe on the same thing.
Does this proposal, and forgive me if you said this and I just didn't hear this piece of it, does this proposal so obviously part of it is asking for permission to build a ramp on public property, which I do think is different than when we talk about if someone's steps encroach on what is technically public property, but is not the sidewalk that anybody considers, it doesn't appear to be public property. It is different in the downtown with a business, I'm not get into for-profit, but a business creating an ADA ramp. At the same time, we certainly want to encourage accessibility, and I'm a little hesitant, and maybe I don't fully understand what Trustee Quesada is proposing, but for the village's sidewalk to be changed, I assume that we would then be having them pay for that if we were, okay. So either way, it would be paid for by the property owner. You're just suggesting that you're proposing that there's a more aesthetically, there's a more aesthetic way to do it.
There's two options that I can see this happening. We don't have to go into the designs, and I agree with you. I'm not here in that regards.
You actually have experience in this, I don't, so.
Again, and technically, like, I will agree with Paul. It meets ADA. It does meet. It complies with all the stuff. But is that what we want? There's two different alternatives right here that this could happen. Besides that, I just will not agree with what they're proposing right now.
Does the proposal that's currently before us from the applicant, where they build a ramp, does that include them paying us rent in an ongoing basis to have their ramp exist on public property?
No.
No, not even that. Because they're coming in front of us right now asking for
I'm
permission.
saying it's just an agreement. Like,
Yes.
We agree to it. Are there any similar agreements like that?
As for ramps, no.
Okay.
And I believe that Joe Augustinelli said he believes there may be one other such ramp in the village, but he was not entirely sure. But not that I'm aware of.
We did not ask Paul and Joe Tremelli to weigh in on this other potential scenario. Could we get their feedback on what the other design scenario is?
Well,
that
may I
Quesada
just
is
make a
suggesting?
suggestion? Before we do that, perhaps it should be asked of the applicant, who is not really an applicant yet, to present a proposal rather than have Paul and Joe Tremelli sort of opine on something which is not there yet.
No, also if they opine, then we have to, it's almost like, I think the applicant would say, well, that's what you told me to do. So,
I mean, there's no,
that's a good thing. I think,
Yeah.
I think we should go back and say, you might want to give us a couple of
Well, how is
options.
this not a proposal? I mean, there's
Because it's not-
design specs.
because it has not been presented anywhere yet. No, because the reason is, he can't do anything until he gets a license agreement. So I can indicate that, in fact, the board would like to see if there are other alternatives you can come up with, because, and then they can come back. He's not submitted he cannot get a building permit at this point, because we can't give a building permit to allow him to build onto village property without an approval from this board.
But not really, because, okay, so he can't apply for a building permit, but he's applied to us to grant him a license agreement. That's what this is. I mean,
Well,
there's,
he has asked, yes, he has come to me and asked if the board would consider giving him a license agreement to do that. That's correct.
right, and so it's perfectly appropriate to ask our engineer and engineering consultants to review how this complies, and they did. So, I mean, I agree, they can't just opine on something that hasn't been spec'd out, but, I mean, I don't know how much of a big deal it is for them to come up with this design, if they were gonna do an alternative design. That may be a little bit onerous for them, so I don't understand why we can't ask our own staff to give us some insight into whether or not that's a viable alternative for us to ask of an applicant.
So basically, we're bringing in staff saying that we don't like the option, but is this suggestion possible, and how do we proceed? which is, no, I'm just want to make
That's
sure
what
I
I'm
follow.
suggesting.
Okay.
You don't like that idea, you got a
Nah,
funny
it's
look on
just,
your face.
I kind of want to, like, if they're fine with it, I feel like we should just roll with it. I mean, this feels like, and no disrespect, like I understand, you know, you have experience in this thing, but this feels like if every time someone comes to the board, right, for this kind of thing, and you've given it to your staff, and they said, hey, it meets the requirements, like, I feel like it's like a slippery slope just to sit up here and explore,
I don't
you
think
know,
it's our role, right? I mean,
you know, two other options.
Well, no, well, I mean, it is our role. This is a public sidewalk,
Otherwise
and what it
nobody
looks
needs
like and
us.
how people. I mean, what it looks
It's not
like.
about
And
and nobody needs us, but I mean, at some point, listen, for
is
me,
there a better way? This hasn't ever been asked of us before, and we're setting an expectation for how this is going to look
well,
going
we don't know yet.
moving
It hasn't
forward.
been asked because
So
we
it just
noticed
this,
it possibly once. We got to verify that first.
let's put it to you this
before
way.
doing that.
So every existing building right now within our downtown, some of them, I want to say more than 10% right now do not meet ADA. So
Right.
if they want to meet ADA, what does that mean? They will have to build a ramp. So every sidewalk on a downtown, let's say, you're going to put a sidewalk on it. You're going to put a ramp on it. So what does that look? We're going to have ramps everywhere. It's either a ramp or we work with a sidewalk. So those are sort of, to me, those are the options. And how do we want our downtown to look? So do we want ramps all over the place? Are we enforcing that every single business has to meet ADA? Do we go back again? And these are questions to our building
I
inspector.
mean, to me, it's
sure.
pretty simple. I mean, the fact
So-
that people want to be compliant or just go out of their way to be compliant and be more accessible is fine. I personally have no preference whether it's a ramp or any other type of design, as long as it's vetted and approved and legal and within our code. The whole notion of character of the neighborhood and consistency of the neighborhood gets very touchy as whose definition and what that means. Because that's all personal preference or philosophy or values or right as far as a particular look or a particular area. That's all. So it is touchy. So, but I guess your point was valid that because it's on a public sidewalk, I guess we can go back to staff and ask them why they approved it and why they didn't suggest alternatives.
So when you're talking about alternatives, ADA alternatives?
That's what the ramp is, sure. The ramp is to meet ADA compliances for their
Right.
particular,
So, but
for
are
their
you,
particular
when
store.
are you talking about other ways that people can comply to be ADA?
Right now, in this particular, we are looking at this particular application or this
Right.
particular case. Sure, we're talking about this ramp that is on a sidewalk that is entering a business. So, again, I have done, in my experience, I have done similar situations like this where we have actually worked with the sidewalk. That's what we do. We work with the sidewalk. We pretty much remove the sidewalk and we level the sidewalk or we ramp the sidewalk to meet the level of the of the space. Or the other stuff that we have done is we ramp from the beginning of the door or with the
So you're
entry
still,
that we have, and then
you're still
inside-
facilitating the ADA
still facilitating
compliance,
the
but you're
ADA
doing it in a less disruptive way.
Correct.
Well, we don't know if it's disruptive though. That's the conversation.
But
In a,
again,
in a less aesthetically disruptive.
correct. So
Which could potentially facilitate the next person who has this building being able to have a sidewalk cafe or some,
bring them in.
you know, the sidewalks have value and but so does ADA compatibility, and I don't know what the price differential is or the engineering obstacles that might come with it.
This is on Maple Avenue, the side
Maple
of the building.
Place, yeah.
Maple
I'm not so much thinking about this particular
Yeah, because
instance.
But
if we're
I am thinking about it.
The
Like,
particular
I hear you,
applicant at hand,
but
yeah.
if the reality is that we want other businesses to be ADA compliant, we want to encourage them to be as accessible to everybody as possible, then, you know, begin as you wish to continue. And in other locations, it will make a difference if you're putting ramps on sidewalks and using the sidewalk for a ramp if there's a better way that is not as disruptive and allows the sidewalk to be utilized in more than one way.
That's fine, and I'm cool with bringing them in and learning, you know, all, but just, it's still subjective as to whether it's disruptive or not. That's why bringing them in, because they already approved what we're calling disruptive, or making the notion that
they're not approving anything. What he said, from my understanding, is for what
they
Stuart
approved the
said, is that they
application for referral to
Said it's
us.
not in
there's
violation
not
of ADA.
it meets
regulations.
ADA requirements.
So
It meets all
I
the
think
stuff.
that it would be, I think to achieve the objective, the appropriate thing would be to do I don't think we want the village being in the business of becoming architects or making recommendations for business owners. I think that we can convey that these are concerns. Can this building owners, whoever submitted this architect, address this in a way that would better facilitate use of the sidewalk, and then I think it's more appropriate to then have our engineers or our staff weigh in on. Again, I think we don't want to also open the door to us creating a sideline of consulting firm. Like, I think there's probably issues with that.
To me, there's two options right now. Sure, is there an agreement of this board right now? Because we need three. Sure, there's three of us agreeing that we should grant this ramp. If there is, then it passes. My opinion is my opinion as a 1 of 5. So the other one is, if they go back and we tell this to the architect that the majority of the board or the whole board, or however you want to phrase it, has concerns about this, and then if they don't have to put a ramp in the sidewalk, they don't have to come back to us.
This is a job where we are always learning on the job. This is the first time we faced this question. It's the first time I've ever heard of this other consideration, and so it's a learning experience for us. So I'd like to better understand what is being suggested by Trustee Quesada. I'm not ready to, make a decision one way or the other on the ramps. Have been like, there's too many questions for us to explore at this point, and they have not yet obviously applied for their building permit because they can't until they have this license agreement, and it is our job to.
I think another way to address it from a village perspective, if we want to set a precedent, if we want to facilitate ADA compliance, which is really important, and we want to facilitate our sidewalks, is then maybe look at this differently, and there's maybe an opportunity to talk to staff on what could we do, what can be, the same we do for signage or anything else. So maybe that's a better way to balance that.
agree, but
Signage,
just keep-
awnings, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
so
just-
that
just
we
keep in mind,
create,
yeah.
we
Years.
say, this is the way we're gonna
We
do
do actually
ramps.
do that.
So
But
that-
just keep in mind, there is an existing conditions, there's an existing building code itself, New York State, and now IBC. So there is some regulations within that if you're renewing or redoing a space that is existing with existing conditions. Like if you have a storefront, if you have a store with an existing bathroom that does not comply with ADA, and you're not touching the bathroom, you don't have to comply with ADA.
Right.
So there are stuff
Right.
that, so again, I don't want this to become a whole study with our staff, where we have to look at all our businesses and what we're doing to meet ADA. I'm not saying that at all.
No, that's not what I'm suggesting.
Right.
I'm just suggesting that if buildings have the choice, there is an issue. It's not too different from exclusionary zoning. When you don't have ADA compliance, it makes it difficult for a segment of the population to be able to go to those businesses, and that can be in some ways perceived as discriminatory. So I'm not suggesting that we make a study or we mandate people to do this. However, if we understand that this may be a consideration, is there an opinion? And I don't know. If there's an opinion of staff on how we can do this while balancing the needs of the community for people who want to do
If we
it.
do that, again, I have to go back and sort of address this other issue, is that building that we have done nothing right now at this point, and it has a ramp. You get to the doors, and that's as far as you go.
Are we going into other ADA, like,
That we don't meet
no,
as
Right.
a municipality.
Okay,
So
okay.
Suggest
so
that-
that's
that-
again.
that
So
we
if
place
we're
that
gonna
on
do
our-
that, and then we have to look into the whole thing.
Right,
That's what I'm saying.
just to be clear, for my sake and the
Understood.
public's sake, we are calling department heads in, as we have done in the past, but for this particular case, to verify what they said and what they recommended, and to help us understand, and to also learn about possible other alternatives that may make it better.
I
Or
think,
aesthetically pleasing.
I think part of, no, I think what you're missing is, I think
No,
Karen was
that's
going back to the architect
diminishing
and actually asking him, what is the other alternatives instead of going back to our staff. And then she was gonna do something else with our staff in regards to the ADA compliance.
Yeah,
and
that was,
safer
it was
building.
two separate, it was just a separate perspective on it, but I think that again, probably going back to the architect and asking them to better address the compliance in a way that,
So what's the first step again? What are we doing next?
I will contact Mr. Hernandez, who's the architect,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
discuss with him what was discussed here, get something from him, and then it can be shown to and vetted by the village engineer and the consulting engineer.
Okay.
More broadly, what Karen was suggesting, I think, was do we, as a village, want to establish a best practice going forward? And maybe that would even encourage downtown businesses to
we would
become
have
more
to, you know,
compliant.
but even for village-owned buildings and stuff. So I think it's like the same way you're looking at making sure you're environmentally, like, you know.
I'm not
yeah.
suggesting that we need to mandate, but that
Yeah.
in this case, the only reason why it's coming to us is because it's on village-owned property. And we're saying, how can we, you know, what are we going to agree to have village-owned property used for, and what's that gonna look like? And if there's a better way to do it, then do it the better way. So that's what we're trying to figure out. Okay. Were
Board
we okay with,
Liberty, I was gonna ask
I'm
you.
good with 8 Liberty.
Yeah.
And in this case, they're asking in advance, and so we don't have to
Charge
penalize
them
them.
that
Yeah.
fee. They
But
agree
they're
with
just
it.
responsible, if it needs to be removed in the future, then that's on them,
That's what we would have in our agreement.
like we've done in the past with
Okay,
Bellevue and others.
all right, then next up, proposed revision to town code regarding dog licensing, use of dog parks, and possible revision to village code.
Thank you.
Always nice to talk about dogs. The town, background, the village and town codes with regard to dog licensing are mirror images of each other. The town is proposing some changes to their licensing, which they would like the village to adopt. Primary is that the licensing year for dogs would go from June 1st to May 31st. Currently, basically, if you get your dog licensed in October, it goes till the end of the following October. And it could be on a rolling basis whenever. So they want to basically have it consistent in terms of that. The other thing that they're doing is that when you get your license, you will then also be permitted to use the dog park and dog run that are in the town, at Ryder Park and at Cedar Lane. The understanding from the town is that that will be an additional $5 which will be tacked on to the license fee. And that way, that can be taken care of. The dog owner would be given a particular colored tag which will indicate that that dog can in fact use the particular dog park or dog run. The town also has provisions, they've also, under their town code, are going to have certain regulations for the use of the dog parks. They're not asking us to adopt that because they're town parks. So what they're mainly looking at is that we would, similar to what they're proposing, is to go on a June 1 to May 31 calendar with regard to dog licenses. And that when a dog is licensed in the village, as it would be in the unincorporated portion of the town, that that part of that fee would go to permit that individual or that particular dog to utilize the dog park or the dog run. Those fees will be set by the town board. My understanding from an email I got from Victoria Caffarelli is that it would be an additional $5. That's what they're looking to do there. The main reason behind this in terms of the changing the schedule is that since our village clerk and town clerk are the same person and basically do it for one, it will be much easier if they could keep everything on the same schedule for everybody. So the town has been having public hearings on this. I think they had another public hearing last night. They've kept it open, so if there are any comments that this board would have towards the town's legislation, they're certainly open to hearing that. If we wanted to revise our chapter, which is Chapter 75 of our code, we'd have to obviously prepare a revised local law, go through the public hearing, and get that approved. But that's what the town has requested of us.
Fine with me.
I'm okay with it.
No
I have a question that
questions.
you don't have to answer now, but how do we enforce or know whether a dog is
Yeah,
licensed?
I asked the same question.
We don't have to answer. It's just more, I thought out loud. But I'm okay with the change to make it easier for the clerk's office. That's fine.
I'll piggyback on that one, because the last section on the resolution is D, the superintendent of recreations. I guess that's the additional regulations deem and provide at the time, so pretty much.
That's only for the park, though, I think, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the superintendent is authorized to remove or ban any dog from the dog park. How does that work? So if it's over the
We'll
weekends.
show ID. We're IDing dogs.
So if it's on the weekends, let's say, how do a superintendent, my understanding is he may not be here on the weekends, may not be here on a Sunday, so who's next person in charge or someone like?
I don't know. I know trustee Levin actually asked that question, I think, of Ms. Caffarelli.
They have
We
had
did
staff
not,
there
did not
before.
get an answer yet, so I don't know what the process is in terms of what happens on weekends. I don't know.
And piggybacking with that one, and the last one says violations. Violations, we provide as article guilty of a fine of $250. So who's doing the enforcement on this one? Is our
Same question.
yeah.
That's,
So again, so it's like who's, to me, it's like we do have a park ranger, sure. We pay for a park ranger. So
In the village parks, I don't know if that's in the town parks.
okay.
I
don't know if they
I
do.
know historically the town has had some sort of staff on and off at the dog parks. I just don't know what their role is, what they do, and
I thought it was the
falls into-
police, no?
I think it's
Police.
the police for if you have an issue with the
Yeah.
you know
No, but
dogs
he's
fighting
talking
and stuff.
about the enforcement. We're talking about the enforcement, if I'm correct, right? Okay.
Yeah, it
So
is.
separate.
yeah, but there really there
don't,
wouldn't
right?
be
Yeah.
there's
It's only
no,
when it's called in.
yeah it's
They
when
don't
it's
monitor
called
it?
in, yeah.
So no enforcement.
Well, I didn't get it from Victoria, but I did call a number of.
Caffarelli.
Thank you.
It always weirds me out when people say that.
Yes,
It's not
I'm
common.
never in a room where there's another Rika, so
Yeah.
I don't have that feeling.
No, it doesn't happen very often.
So I did speak to a number of people who knew it was so popular. I'm not a dog owner. So the thing that's important, number one, it should be consistent town and village. So I think we all can agree on that. And, you know, the fee is high if there's a violation. I don't see anybody disagreeing, so I'm assuming people are agreeing. And that it should be, you know, one time a year, like, you know, the parking. So, I mean, there are a lot of agreements here. I don't think that's a big deal. The enforcement is a deal. The truth is, there are people that use that park, and they don't like when people who come in and don't have those tags, and they actually are the ones that will do the enforcement, because
Yeah.
they get really angry.
There's
and
a
they'll
cult-
call-
There
in
is
fact,
there is some dog peer
There's a
pressure
group-
going on.
yeah,
I
there's a
will tell
group.
you that the
Yeah.
real issue that I heard from more than one person is, number one, they're sick and tired of the professional dog walkers from Briarcliff coming and using the park on the
Big
time they know
issue.
nobody can enforce, and they have
They're
5 or
cool.
6 or
They are.
7 dogs,
and
and they let them
and they
run.
can't control the dogs, and it
It's
causes a lot of
phenomenal
And
problems.
apparently, since Ossining was ranked a number of years ago as an amazing dog park, people from the city come with their train. I had no idea that people would ever bring a dog by car train up here.
I still want to
do
see what that car train ride looks like.
Seriously,
So,
I
have heard
my
that.
eyes
though.
have been open, but at the end of the day, I think the enforcement, even though I didn't hear back from Victoria, but I think part of the enforcement is if you put up a sign that these are the rules, and if you do these tags that we can look at, we're gonna call the police, because frankly, we don't want people coming in with fire. So it gives people sort of the permission, and then if the police doesn't come, well, I can assure you, the town will be hearing about the police not showing up to take. So I think it's like, give us the convenience, that I think we all agree on. I don't think anybody here is arguing about whether it should be $5, but we need permission. I don't use that. I had to call people. It seems to me like I didn't hear anybody say this is a bad idea, which you and I understand, we all do, that that's a rarity. People said this is pretty straightforward, it should be done. So I'm in support of it, because that's what I'm hearing from people that use the place who live here. So I'm in support. I don't know what the downside, the enforcement's an issue, but I'm feeling like the people will take care of it, you know, and I think they should, and I think, does anybody see a downside?
So, yeah, I'd just like to better understand this. So the dog license is $10 if your pet is spayed or neutered, your dog's spayed or neutered, and $18 if they're unspayed or unneutered.
We have a bed.
Well, I guess that's
license.
kind of a joke, but at the same time, like,
No.
I know there's been a lot of promotion recently from the clerk's office to encourage people to get their dogs licensed, and it's supposed to be done annually. I don't know, I have a sneaking suspicion that most dogs in the village of Ossining are not licensed. I'm not sure what the enforcement of that is at all.
Or if our limited resources should.
Right. I'm not sure what the benefit of it is. I guess if your dog gets lost, is that the benefit?
It's if it's lost, if it's, if a dog bites somebody, you want to know that it's, so there's a lot of reasons
Well,
why
if
you
you have a
need to
dog who
like.
bites people, you might not be getting it licensed. So I'm just wondering, look,
No,
what makes
if-
anybody want to go
because
have their
if
dog
your dog,
licensed?
if there's consequences to owners if they don't license their dog. So if they do get, it's like anything else. You if you get away with it, you're fine. If you get caught, you don't. But there's other reasons that you want to license your dog.
Part of it is if they run off. I
If
mean,
they
that's why
if they
people
run
license-
off, especially, but also.
Sorry, does anyone here own a dog? What are we, like, the only people in Ossining that don't own a dog?
Too.
So, okay, so what's the reason that one would license?
So they can use the park.
It's to register it for, I think, if there's an accident, an incident, that way, if you've registered it, you're showing that they've had their shots.
Right.
It proves all those things.
And to take him to the park.
And, well, I actually wonder, as a Newcastle resident, can I now not take my dog to the dog park?
You can pay.
You
to
can,
do
no,
that.
no, you can
$5,
pay.
or is it still 20-something?
100.
I don't know.
250 apparently.
No. That was my other question
So-
to Victoria, is if
so
I
then-
come on the weekend, how do I register the dog? Because there's nobody to talk to.
Well,
The office is closed.
I hear that the dog park is so wonderful. I know people who have moved to Ossining just to be able to bring their dog to the dog park.
A suggestion.
Yeah, except I haven't finished my comments, but go ahead.
No, because I think this will help us understand, us non-dog owners, maybe just me, because can the rec advisory board look, it's technically a park within the Austin Recreation and Parks Department.
No, they've talked about it a number of times. and
Yes,
Fine,
they have.
because I know
This
that-
is a result of what they've talked
Because,
about.
because I know, from what I know, my experience, the town and the village have expensed through mediation, through meetings, it's been a big thing for years. So I'm okay with moving it forward. I mean,
So my question is just this. So let's say you have a dog that is spayed, and you are a good dog owner and you want to have your dog licensed. So you come annually and you get your dog licensed, and that costs you $10. Fine, it's a nominal fee. Dogs are expensive. $10 is nothing. And then now we would be imposing upon them a mandatory additional $5 fee. So whether they want to use these parks or not, whether you own a car and can drive to these parks or not, you must pay a $5 fee that is earmarked just for the dog parks in another municipality. I'm just saying that
Good
is
point.
that appropriate for us to be doing? Is there any question of that? And let me also say, from a budgeting perspective, the town parks are in the town general fund. The dog parks, it's fine. It's being carved out, so the only people contributing to it are the dog owners. But it's now dog owners whether they want to use it or not.
that's a good point.
It's only $5, so maybe it doesn't really matter.
No, it
It's
matters.
only
Every dollar
$5, but
matters.
but the other thing is, I'm just raising those questions. This is a law, so we'll have public hearings and people can come and complain about the $5 and it being mandatory if they want.
Okay.
I think, what's the fee right now
It's just not mandatory.
to license your dog?
10 for spayed, 18 for unspayed.
Go up.
Karen?
What do you want, a share of the pie because village
No,
people
I don't want to
have
share of
do
the pie.
that?
I just don't know that it's appropriate for us to be mandating that
that's a
village
valid
residents, whether you have a car and can drive to
Should they
Cedar
be
Lane
sub-
Park for
should they
your
be
dog.
subsidizing another community? Yeah, another
So
municipality.
again, I think that when
Operations.
you talk about the parks, and the parks in Ossining, there's a sense that
It's
you
not,
know,
though.
Except
It's
that
not, though.
unincorporated town residents don't contribute to the village park, so it's not
It's
equivalent.
not, correct.
well, when, again,
Bigger picture question.
I think that what we're talking about is one of the challenges, is there's nobody at the dog parks to make sure that, oh, your dog you paid for your dog to be
Right.
here and everything, and that creates a problem. And it does create a big problem. And I have no, I don't know that anybody knows how many, I think a tremendous number of people from the village use those parks. I don't know the breakdown of, I would just say based on population alone, that a significant number of people from the village are using the town dog parks. It's a very nominal fee, but it seems like the most cost-effective way to maintain some. The parks have gotten really overrun by these city coming up these it's become a big problem, and the dog owners take it very, very seriously. And I think again at the end of the day, it's an issue that I believe that every dog owner in the village of Ossining who uses a dog park wants a solution to. So from that from that perspective, I think that it is appropriate.
I get it, but if the concern is that it's difficult to enforce and people are coming up from the city or dog walkers are coming in from Briarcliff and using it, this doesn't address that. It just gives an influx of money to the dog parks from village residents, which may be fine, and it's still only $5. So I'm not terribly concerned about it, but
No, because if
It
they
may not be
weren't,
an
because
issue, but-
it's because if they're there and they're not licensed from the community, then you have a way to determine that. So
Also, I don't know if it's in the writing, but at least one person told me that they're planning to also put a sign up there that says all of this. So now there's like, a thing that says, no, you can't use this unless your dog is licensed. Like, go get a license to
Yeah,
start.
like
and
you-
if it's
so-
a regular that comes up from the city, then like,
So if somebody,
Go get
yeah,
one.
again, to Rika's point, it is a little bit of a community policing effort in that people will know.
But that's true whether we make it mandatory that village residents pay for this or not.
Yeah, the mayor's point is, I think it's valid, whether or not it is okay to force village residents to pay for it.
if they don't pay for it, how will they get a license to then use the park?
They would still pay for their
But
license
then they
fee.
can't, no, but they may not want to use the park.
Right, we're automatically just forcing it.
Plenty of dog walkers who don't use Cedar Lane Park or whatever the other one is. I'm not a dog walker.
It's a mandate, that's all.
It's a minor one, so maybe it's not a big deal, but I just raise the questions.
And if the parks are having that many issues of disarray in conduct and maintenance, that's a general Parks and Rec question to have with Bill.
For what?
And they've been working actively to address it. I don't want to
No, I'm just saying, but no, I'm not either, but if
It is an issue where the victims of actually running good dog parks. So, you're a victim of your success because you have
Yep.
other
The minute that
interloper
article
dogs wanting to
hits-
come in.
No, really, the minute we became one of the top 10 dog parks in New York State or something,
Should have
every
installed or had staff
everybody
or
got
forced
here.
or-
Yes, but to pay staff, you're not covering by fees, so then you have to increase your fees every year to pay the
Discussion
staff.
that we gotta figure it out though. That's our job.
So right now, it's they have it set up with the town, with their clerk. I have it on the web blast right now. Oh, sorry. That you can renew, once you have your license, you'll be able to renew it online. Maybe there's a way to set it up that if, just to your point, that you can opt in or opt out to the $5 fee. Because it's far less than I think the price is right now for usage of the dog park. But then,
Oh, that's a good point. So what does
so
it cost
maybe if
right
they're
now
paying, I believe it's 20. It's either 20 or 25. I could be wrong. I'd have to take a look and see.
Is that for a Newcastle resident or is that for unincorporated or
That's
everybody?
just for anybody, I think. Or, I'd have to look and see. But if you're gonna go online and you're going to pay the $10, you're gonna pay with a credit card, then there's a way to say $5 more, you can use the dog park.
But I think that if that sort of undermines the economy of scale here. So I don't know that, I think the intent of this was mandating it because it was very, very challenging to know whether somebody or not had paid that $20 to use the dog park. So that's the genesis of this. So it was like reducing the cost, but spreading it out so that you can still do the improvement, still maintain the parks and everything else, but that you're not, there is no real perfect answer here.
And that's a wonderful philosophy when it comes to healthcare for all. I'm just not sure that it applies to dog parks.
Can we figure out what?
I'd like to
what
just
is
go
the-
to a public meeting and see what the public actually has to say, and
Can we figure out what is the percentage of how many village residents have registered their dogs in
I
comparison
mean,
to
I'm
us?
sure the clerk's office would have that information.
Yeah, can we get that information at least? I would like to see if we,
But to their
there's gonna be a
point, we don't
mandate
know
for, yeah, but,
Parks now, whether they're-
yeah, but if there's gonna be a mandate, so to speak, of the additional $5, then we can actually see, like, all these additional people, of the residents from the village side are gonna be paying those $5 into a town park. I don't know.
So is this going to be on a resolution?
I'm
To
in
call for a
support
public
of this.
hearing?
I'd like to have a public meeting to get
So
public
next week we'll call
input.
for a public hearing?
Yeah.
Yeah, the only hesitancy I have is if the town decides to make a change to its local law, you know, we're gonna sort of, I'd rather follow them than basically be the leader on this one. Their
So would
public
I.
hearing is not closed yet.
Oh.
So I'd rather know that that they pass something, and then we can,
Piggyback on that.
because otherwise you're gonna call a public hearing. I don't have the, you know, if they may change what they have.
Well, is our feedback and our questioning gonna be forwarded to them to possibly, I mean, it's a two-way street, right?
Absolutely. Their public hearing is open, so if you want to, any comments you want to send to them, you are absolutely welcome to.
So
help
that'll be the biggest issue, is because then it really comes down to, you know, it will be difficult if we have a different policy.
Yeah, theirs
You know,
doesn't
it
work if
just-
we don't do
it-
the
it
same
just-
thing.
It just doesn't work at all.
I'll let them know what the concerns are. How's that?
And we can send them the link. Okay, one more thing.
Okay.
Last is simple. It is a tax certiorari settlement involving the CVS. It is for 3 tax years for a total of $7,822.26. And a judgment has been signed, and this is the village's portion to return back to CVS Albany LLC.
And that will be a resolution on next week's list.
Yes, it will be. No.
Can I ask you a question about CVS?
Yeah.
That's the one down in the Arcadian
Yes.
area? Yeah. So the parking lot condition and landscaping, all that, who's like responsible for all that? They are, but who is the one that could go and say to them, like, fix this place up a bit?
Digital properties.
We've actually, the building department in the past has done that, when there have been issues back there. So if there's something in particular that is brought to the attention of the building department, they'll talk to CVS. And in the past, it's been taken care of.
Okay, so I should contact the building department,
I
is
would,
what you're
yes.
saying? Okay.
We have executive session on here. Do we actually have executive session?
I do not.
All right, so no executive session. We get to cross that off. Woo! Because what we were tentatively going to have will be next week. So
Okay, so that's it?
just a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Jump right in there.
With that, this meeting is adjourned. We'll see you next week at the Birdsall Fagan Police Court facility for the legislative session.